Imagine a river valley at dawn, long before the modern world came to be. The sky is soft with the blue hush of early morning, and the land stirs gently beneath the first golden rays. Along the slow-moving waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, reeds sway in rhythm with the breeze. It is here, in this fertile crescent of earth, that humanity first shaped its future, with tools not of stone or fire alone, but of imagination. This was Mesopotamia, a land not just of early cities, but of early ideas. The story of ancient invention begins here, in the quiet ingenuity of early farmers and scribes, where necessity gave rise to marvels that would ripple across the world for thousands of years. Invention in these early days was not dramatic or sudden. It was slow, deliberate, and intimate. A pot reshaped for better cooking. A canal dug just a little deeper. A piece of clay pressed with symbols that became language. Each small act, seemingly simple, was the start of something vast. Perhaps the most quietly revolutionary of all Mesopotamian inventions was writing. Not the poetic kind that flows from thought and emotion, but the practical, earthy writing born of grain and trade. Around 3200 BCE, Sumerian scribes began marking clay tablets with wedge-shaped impressions using a sharpened reed called a stylus. These marks formed a script we now call cuneiform, and it began as a way to track temple inventories, taxes, and offerings. But slowly, writing extended its fingers into law, story, astronomy, and dreams. This wasn't just invention, it was memory made durable. Ideas could now live outside the body, surviving time itself. Cuneiform led to the codification of law, such as Hammurabi's Code, one of the world's oldest legal documents, etched into stone in Babylon around 1754 BCE. It wasn't just about justice, it was about order, continuity, and shared understanding. Law as an invention gave structure to societies, and writing gave it permanence. But the mind behind these early innovations was equally focused on more tangible things like food and water. The Mesopotamians were early masters of irrigation. With simple tools and remarkable foresight, they redirected the waters of their rivers to nourish vast fields of barley and wheat. They carved canals with stone and bronze, built gates to manage flow, and invented methods for measuring water levels that were precise for their time. Some scholars believe they even created the earliest versions of the plumb line, helping them level structures and ditches with striking accuracy. These were not flashy inventions, but deeply human ones, born of watching, waiting, and wondering. To cultivate land in a place where rain was scarce, one had to understand the rhythms of nature intimately. That knowledge became technology, and over time, it evolved into more complex tools like the shaduf, a long pole with a counterweight used to lift water from a river or canal. Simple in form, elegant in function, the wheel, often associated with transport, also emerged from these early city-states. But its first known use wasn't for carts, it was for pottery. Around 3500 BCE, the potter's wheel transformed how clay vessels were shaped, allowing for more symmetry, speed, and creativity. It wasn't until later that wheels were adapted for chariots and wagons. From the kitchen to the battlefield, this small leap in rotational thinking became one of humanity's most transformative tools. Even time itself was gently tamed by these early thinkers. The Mesopotamians divided the day and night into 12-hour periods and counted seconds and minutes using base 60, a numerical system that still lingers in how we tell time today. The circle of the clock, the 60 minutes within an hour, these are echoes of their innovation. To them, the movement of stars and shadows was not only a mystery, but a map. They built ziggurats, not just as temples but as observatories. High above the dust and noise of the cities, priests and astronomers watched the sky, charted the movements of planets, and carved time into manageable pieces. So many of these ancient tools feel distant now: styluses made of reeds, tablets baked in the sun, water lifted by hand, wheels shaped in clay. Yet they whisper to us from deep in the past, reminding us that invention often begins with quiet observation, with a need to solve a small, persistent problem. And that through these humble beginnings, entire civilizations were able to bloom. As we drift further into this journey, the rhythm of invention will carry us from valley to desert, from temple to workshop, where even more wonders await, some lost in time, some still living in the devices we hold in our hands today. But for now, the sun rises slowly over Mesopotamia, casting soft shadows across the tablet-littered floor of a scribe's chamber, and the air hums with the silence of ideas just beginning to take shape. Beneath a sky brushed with gold and ochre, the Nile River moves with a timeless rhythm, as if it has always known where it was going. Along its banks, palms lean into the breeze and herons wade in slow, deliberate steps. The river does not rush. It flows with certainty, mirroring the patient intelligence of those who built their world upon its waters. Ancient Egypt, often remembered for its pyramids and pharaohs, was also a realm of extraordinary invention, where the practical and the spiritual wove together into everyday life. It is here, beside the Nile, that some of humanity's earliest attempts to master time took shape. The Egyptians, observing the seasons of flooding and planting, developed a calendar so precise that it rivaled even those created millennia later. They noticed that the star Sirius rose just before dawn in the days preceding the Nile's annual inundation, and from this observation, they structured their year into 365 days, a solar calendar divided into 12 months of 30 days, with 5 extra festival days added at the end. This calendar was not only a tool for agriculture, it was a quiet kind of power, allowing priests and scribes to predict the seasons and mark the rhythm of rituals. Their understanding of time extended into devices as well. One of the earliest timekeeping tools in history, the shadow clock, or sundial, was refined by Egyptian astronomer priests. Carved from stone, these instruments used the movement of the sun's shadow across calibrated lines to track the passing hours. Later, they created water clocks, or clepsydrae, which measured time through the steady drip of water from one vessel to another. Time, once the domain of stars and mystery, could now be counted, partitioned, and shared. It became a shared thread running through Egyptian society, linking the living to the dead, the farmer to the priest, the harvest to the temple. But invention in Egypt wasn't limited to measuring the heavens. It reached into the earth, into the body, into the home. Take, for instance, the field of cosmetics, an area where beauty, health, and science met in a single stroke of kohl across the eye. Ancient Egyptians are credited with developing one of the earliest known forms of eye makeup, made by grinding green malachite or black galena into powder and mixing it with animal fat or water. But this was no mere adornment. These substances served medicinal and spiritual purposes, protecting the eyes from glare and infection, warding off illness, and invoking the favor of the gods. Their understanding of chemistry extended far beyond makeup. Egyptian embalmers, working with precision and reverence, mastered the craft of preservation, using a complex array of natural materials, natron to dry the body, resins and oils to protect the skin, linen wrappings treated with substances we now know had antibacterial properties. Mummification was more than ritual. It was applied science born of thousands of years of observation and refinement. In the realm of construction, The ingenuity of ancient Egyptian architects still stirs wonder. Long before steel or electricity, they raised stone monuments that aligned with celestial events to within fractions of a degree. The pyramids, often seen as mystical or miraculous, were in fact products of careful design, labor organization, and experimental problem-solving. Lever systems, copper chisels, sledges lubricated with water to reduce friction on desert sand. Each tool or technique was born from necessity and sharpened by trial. Mathematics and measurement were central to these feats. Egyptians used a system of units based on body parts. The cubit, the length from elbow to fingertip, became a standardized unit through the use of master rods carved from granite. Surveyors and builders used ropes with evenly spaced knots to create right angles, laying the foundation for structures that still stand today. Geometry, in this context, wasn't just a theory, it was a living practice. Even paper itself, or at least its ancient ancestor, finds its roots in this civilization. The papyrus plant, tall and slender along the Nile, was harvested, sliced, soaked, and pressed into sheets that formed the basis of one of the earliest writing materials. Papyrus scrolls allowed knowledge to be transported and copied with far more ease than clay tablets. Medicine, religion, astronomy, all were preserved and shared through this elegant innovation. And then there is the Nilometer, a quiet marvel of hydraulic observation. Found in temples and carved deep into riverbanks, these structures used graduated columns or staircases to measure the rise and fall of the river. When the floodwaters reached certain marks, priests could predict the quality of the harvest to come. It was both scientific tool and symbol of divine order, reminding the people that even nature's great pulse could be read and understood. These inventions did not exist in isolation. They emerged from a world where belief and necessity danced in unison, where the act of measuring time or preserving a body was as much about connection to the eternal as it was about earthly needs. Ancient Egyptian innovation was not loud or restless. It was methodical, reverent, and deeply embedded in the rhythms of life. As we drift now beyond the bend of the Nile, past columns of hieroglyphs and the low hum of temple chants, we carry with us the quiet brilliance of a civilization that shaped its world with tools of thought and care. And ahead lies another chapter, across the sea, in lands of marble and myth, where invention would take on new shapes and soar into the realm of the mechanical. The breeze carries the scent of sea salt and laurel through narrow, sun-dappled streets. In the distance, whitewashed temples shimmer beneath the Mediterranean sun, their columns casting long, patient shadows across the marble. This is ancient Greece, a land of thinkers, builders, and dreamers. Here, invention takes on new shapes, not only born of necessity, but of wonder. The Greeks were not content to simply observe the world. They sought to explain it, replicate it, and even play with it. It was in this spirit that one of the most astonishing devices of the ancient world was conceived, the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in the depths of the sea near a small Greek island and dated to around 150 BCE, this intricate system of bronze gears and dials is often referred to as the world's first analog computer. Housed in a wooden box no larger than a shoebox, the mechanism could predict the movements of the sun and moon, track eclipses, and model the cycles of the planets. Each turn of its handle brought celestial bodies into harmonious motion, a miniature universe ticking gently beneath the fingertips. For centuries, it lay forgotten beneath the waves, a quiet echo of Hellenistic brilliance. But the mind that could imagine such a device did not emerge in isolation. Greek culture encouraged curiosity, dialogue, and experimentation. Philosophers like Pythagoras, Archimedes, and Aristotle walked hand in hand with craftsmen and artisans, their ideas feeding into practical invention. Take Archimedes, for instance. Born in the city of Syracuse around 287 BCE, he was as much an engineer as a thinker. He devised compound pulleys that allowed a single person to move enormous weights, and the Archimedean screw, a spiral-shaped device that could lift water uphill when turned, remains in use today in various forms. His principles of buoyancy and levers weren't just the foundation of physics, they were tools to reshape the world. A single lever, he claimed, could move the earth, if only there were a place to stand. And in that quiet statement was the essence of invention, the realization that with enough understanding, even the immovable could yield. The Greeks also developed highly refined tools for measurement and observation. They built astrolabes to chart the stars, water clocks to regulate speeches in court, and complex surveying instruments to measure land with uncanny accuracy. Mathematics was both theory and tool. Geometry wasn't merely drawn on parchment, it was carved into the layout of theaters, temples, and entire cities. One of the lesser-known but deeply fascinating areas of Greek invention was their exploration of automata, self-operating machines designed to mimic life. Hero of Alexandria, a brilliant engineer and writer from the 1st century CE, described devices powered by air pressure, steam, and weights that could open temple doors, pour wine, and even produce theatrical illusions. His Aeolipile, a rotating steam engine, was the first of its kind, centuries ahead of its practical use. These devices weren't just entertainments or curiosities, they were philosophical experiments, ways of asking, what does it mean to animate matter? How might the divine express itself through motion and precision? And yet, many of these inventions were designed not for war or empire, but for delight. In temples, miniature birds sang using hidden water chambers, statues moved, lights flickered, and sacred spaces came alive through carefully engineered tricks. These wonders inspired awe, not through fear, but through gentle astonishment, a sense that human hands could echo divine patterns. Even in daily life, invention shaped the rhythms of Greek society. Simple cranes built with winches and pulleys allowed heavy marble blocks to be raised with surprising ease. Heating systems in baths used ducts and vents to distribute warmth, an early form of radiant heating. Musical instruments like the hydraulis, a type of water-powered pipe organ, filled public spaces with carefully calibrated sound, combining art and engineering in harmonious waves. Greek medicine, too, carried this blend of science and observation. Hippocrates and his followers catalogued symptoms, treatments, and surgeries, using specialized tools that reflected both care and craft. Forceps, scalpels, and catheters, many made from bronze, reveal a society not only concerned with philosophy, but deeply engaged in the material well-being of its people. At the heart of all this was a quiet belief that the universe was knowable, that patterns could be found in stars and cells, in music and motion, in the gentle rotation of a gear or the swelling of the tide. The Greeks did not invent for conquest alone, they invented to understand, to question, and to reflect beauty in form and function. As the sun sets across the Aegean, casting long shadows over amphoras and olive groves, we turn our gaze to another land, one that borrowed from Greek thought, but built upon it with roads, arches, and concrete dreams. Ahead lies the Roman Empire, where invention became infrastructure, and the machinery of daily life reached a new level of scale and ambition. The soft light of morning stretches across a Roman road, its stones still smooth from centuries of footsteps. Beneath a pale sky, the rhythm of hooves and sandals once echoed along these paths, connecting cities, ports, farms, and frontier outposts. The roads, so solid and straight, are more than stone. They are a symbol of Roman invention, not in a single stroke of brilliance, but in the long, measured labor of making the world function more efficiently. The Roman Empire was built not only on conquest, but on connection. And at the heart of that connection was infrastructure, a lattice of practical marvels that held an empire together. Their roads, laid out with mathematical precision, were masterpieces of layered engineering. At the base, a trench was dug and filled with crushed stone for drainage. On top, successive layers of gravel, sand, and paving stones were pressed and aligned with painstaking care. Some roads were crowned at the center to shed water, and ditches flanked the sides to keep the path clear in rain or storm. They built over 250,000 miles of roads, a web of stone that made movement possible in ways the world had never seen. But roads were only the beginning. If the heart of Rome beat in its forums and basilicas, then its blood flowed through its aqueducts. These soaring arches, often stretching for miles across valleys and hills, carried fresh water from distant springs into cities, towns, and villas. Built with a careful gradient, sometimes as little as a few inches per mile, these structures used gravity alone to deliver clean water to bathhouses, fountains, and private homes. The Aqua Claudia, one of the most majestic aqueducts, ran for over 40 miles and still stands in fragments today, a quiet testament to Roman foresight. What made these systems so enduring was not just design but material. Roman concrete, opus cementia, was unlike anything the world had known. Made from a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, and seawater, it could harden underwater and was remarkably durable. This allowed the Romans to build harbors, bridges, and massive domes like the Pantheon, whose concrete ceiling, unreinforced by steel, still holds firm after nearly 2,000 years. They poured concrete into wooden molds, layering bricks and stone, creating structures both sturdy and graceful. The secret of their mix, particularly the use of pozzolana, a volcanic sand, would not be rediscovered for centuries. And then there was the Roman bath, a blend of architecture, plumbing, and public ritual. These spaces were more than places to cleanse the body. They were social hubs, architectural wonders, and marvels of hydraulic engineering. Beneath the stone floors of many bathhouses ran networks of clay pipes and hollow bricks, part of a system known as hypocaust. This underfloor heating system channeled hot air from a furnace through raised floors and into wall flues, warming rooms with gentle radiant heat. The temperature could be adjusted by airflow, and different chambers offered cold, warm, or hot baths, each experience tailored to comfort and custom. Roman plumbing too reached impressive levels of sophistication. Lead pipes, or fistulae, delivered water into homes and public spaces, regulated by valve systems and inscriptions that recorded ownership or rights. Latrines flushed with running water, and sewers like the Cloaca Maxima diverted waste from the heart of the city. While not every solution was ideal, lead, for example, carried health risks not yet understood. The scale and intent were unprecedented. Rome, at its height, was a city that hummed beneath the surface with flowing water and hidden heat. Even beyond the capital, this mindset traveled. Across the empire, from the wind-swept outposts of Britannia to the deserts of North Africa, Roman engineers surveyed land, built bridges, dug wells, and standardized construction. Military camps were laid out in precise grids. Mile markers and roadside inns supported the flow of goods, messages, and soldiers. Tools were standardized, construction manuals written, and labor organized with astonishing consistency. Invention was systematized, and in that system was power. But invention for the Romans also touched the quieter corners of life. In kitchens, they refined the use of rotary mills for grinding grain. In fields, they improved plows with iron tips and developed crop rotation techniques to improve soil health. In homes, Bronze locks and keys offered security, and glass-blowing techniques brought translucent vessels into common use. Sundials marked the hours with carved elegance, and folding furniture, designed for portability and space-saving, reflected a balance of function and form. The genius of Roman innovation wasn't always in what they created first, but in how they scaled it, adapted it, and integrated it into daily existence. Their world was a world of solutions, not flashy or mystical, but grounded, human, and quietly enduring. As dusk falls over the hills of Latium and the last chariots roll homeward on ancient stone, we step beyond the frontiers of the West. Ahead lies a land of silk and scrolls, where invention took other forms, in ink, paper, and the delicate motion of bamboo gears. We turn now to ancient China, where the winds of innovation blew not from empire alone, but from the brushstrokes of poets, astronomers, and silent artisans. In the hush of early morning, a paper lantern sways gently in the breeze. Beyond it, a pond mirrors the sky, scattered with lotus petals, while the soft rustle of bamboo fills the garden like a whispered conversation. This is ancient China, a world where invention is a form of listening, to the wind, to the stars, to the movement of water and the flicker of flame. In this civilization, ingenuity was not loud or boastful. It was subtle, refined, and often hidden within the ordinary. Among the most quietly transformative of all ancient inventions is something now so commonplace that its true wonder is easy to forget. Before its development, writing materials were heavy and cumbersome, bamboo slips tied with string, or silk that was costly and rare. But in the Eastern Han Dynasty, around 105 CE, a court official named Kai Lun refined a process that changed the world. By mashing together bark, hemp, rags, and water, then pressing and drying the mixture into thin sheets, he created a writing surface that was lightweight, affordable, and easy to produce. Paper quickly spread across China, transforming education, record-keeping, art, and the transmission of ideas. Alongside paper came another quiet marvel: ink. Chinese ink was made from soot, often pine, combined with animal glue, and formed into solid sticks. Artists and scholars would grind the stick on an inkstone with a small amount of water, producing a rich, deep black that was as suitable for poetry as it was for technical drawings. This process of grinding ink was itself meditative, reinforcing the connection between the mind and the hand, between thought and creation. These materials gave rise to the four treasures of the study: brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and with them, the scholar's studio became a place not just of learning, but of invention. Calendars were refined, star maps drawn, and medical texts meticulously recorded. The natural world, so often elusive, was now open to exploration and imitation. In this same spirit of inquiry, Chinese engineers turned their attention to the invisible forces of the earth. Around 132 CE, the polymath Zhang Heng built one of history's earliest seismographs, a device capable of detecting distant earthquakes. It took the form of a large bronze urn with 8 dragon heads, each holding a small ball in its mouth. Beneath each dragon sat a toad, mouth open. When an earthquake struck, internal mechanisms would trigger the release of a single ball, which would drop into the mouth of the corresponding toad, indicating the direction of the tremor. The precision and symbolism of the design reveal not only mechanical brilliance, but a reverence for balance and understanding. Navigation, too, was transformed by Chinese innovation. The earliest compasses, known as south-pointing spoons, date back to the Han Dynasty. These were carved from lodestone, a naturally magnetized mineral, and mounted on polished bronze plates. The spoon would slowly rotate, until it pointed south, not north as in modern compasses, due to differing directional traditions. This device was first used in the practice of feng shui, aligning structures with natural energy flows, but it later became vital in maritime exploration, opening oceans to precise travel. In the skies above, astronomers tracked celestial movements with incredible detail. Armillary spheres, intricate models of the heavens made with interlocking rings, allowed scholars to observe and predict eclipses, solstices, and the positions of planets. These instruments were not only tools of science, but also of state, used to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. An emperor who aligned with the cosmos ruled with legitimacy. A misalignment reflected in the stars or the failure of harvests was seen as a sign of divine disapproval. Fireworks, so often associated with celebration, also have their roots in Chinese experimentation with alchemy. Initially developed as part of efforts to discover immortality, early mixtures of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur produced explosions instead of elixirs. The earliest firecrackers, hollow bamboo filled with gunpowder, were used to scare away evil spirits, long before they dazzled the skies. Over time, this same discovery led to the invention of gunpowder, a transformative force that altered warfare across continents. But in its earliest forms, it was a mystical curiosity, something to be observed, not wielded. Chinese engineers also explored automation. Mechanical toys and timekeeping devices, powered by flowing water or falling weights, were described in texts from the Song dynasty. One such marvel, designed by Su Song in the 11th century, was an astronomical clock tower that combined a water-driven escapement mechanism, a concept not seen in Europe until centuries later, with rotating armillary spheres and celestial globes. Every hour, miniature figures would emerge to strike bells, drums, or gongs, marking the passage of time with a gentle theatricality. Even agricultural tools reflected this spirit of thoughtful adaptation. Iron plows with curved blades, wheelbarrows with centrally placed wheels for better balance, and chain pumps for irrigation made farming more efficient, allowing populations to grow and thrive. Many of these designs were so effective that they remained in use with minimal change for generations. And beneath all this innovation flowed an idea that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Inventions were recorded in encyclopedias, manuals, and scrolls, passed from master to apprentice, father to son, teacher to scholar. While some devices were closely guarded in the imperial court, many others spread widely, carried by merchants and monks along the winding paths of the Silk Road. As the lanterns are lit and the moon rises above tiled rooftops and quiet courtyards, we leave this realm of brushstrokes and bronze gears. Ahead lies another legacy, of temples built without nails, of metal crafted with impossible purity, and of medical tools that shimmer with precision. We continue our journey next to the Indian subcontinent, where invention moved to the rhythm of sacred chants and surgical skill. The soft hum of a conch shell rolls across the waters of the Ganges as morning mist curls gently above the river. In the courtyard of a stone temple, the air smells faintly of incense and sandalwood. Carved pillars rise like trees, covered in stories told in chisel and curve. This is ancient India, a place where invention and spirituality were not separate realms, but twin expressions of a single flowing awareness. To create was not only to build, but to honor the cosmic order, to harmonize with the universe through number, structure, and care. One of the most quietly profound contributions of ancient India lies in mathematics, specifically the concept of zero. While early traces of positional number systems appear in Mesopotamian and Mayan cultures, it was Indian mathematicians who fully realized and formalized zero, not merely as a placeholder, but as a number in its own right. The symbol we recognize today, a small circle representing emptiness, appeared in texts such as the Bakhshali manuscript and was further refined by scholars like Brahmagupta in the 7th century CE. His work laid out rules for arithmetic operations involving zero and negative numbers, a foundational leap without which modern mathematics would be impossible. These discoveries unfolded not in cold laboratories, but in monasteries and forest academies, where the Vedic tradition encouraged deep reflection, debate, and abstraction. Indian scholars were also among the first to propose that the Earth rotates on its axis and that gravity was a force pulling objects downward, insights that emerged centuries before they were formalized in Europe. Geometry and algebra too found fertile ground. The Sulba Sutras, ancient texts dating back as early as 800 BCE, provided geometric principles used in the construction of fire altars, sacred spaces with precise proportions and alignments. These texts reveal knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem long before Pythagoras, as well as techniques for constructing right angles and calculating square roots. Here, mathematics was not separate from daily life or belief. It was a sacred tool used to align ritual with the cosmos. Medicine, meanwhile, blossomed in the form of Ayurveda, a comprehensive system of health rooted in balance, observation, and prevention. Far from being mystical guesswork, early Ayurvedic practitioners developed detailed understandings of anatomy, diagnosis, surgery, and pharmacology. Sushruta, a physician and surgeon believed to have lived around 600 BCE, compiled one of the world's earliest surgical manuals, the Sushruta Samahita. In its pages are descriptions of over 300 surgical procedures and 120 instruments, from forceps and scalpels to tools for eye surgery and dental care. Sushruta is credited with pioneering techniques such as rhinoplasty, reconstructive surgery of the nose, which involved using skin from the forehead, a method that would later be echoed in 18th century European surgery. The delicacy and hygiene involved in these ancient procedures show a level of medical awareness far beyond what might be expected for the era. Many surgical tools were crafted from fine metal, and the emphasis on sterilization, boiling instruments, and cleaning wounds with antiseptic herbs anticipates modern practices by millennia. Metallurgy itself was an area of exceptional skill in ancient India. Perhaps the most famous symbol of this mastery is the Iron Pillar of Delhi, a 6-ton column standing over 7 meters tall, erected during the Gupta Empire around 400 CE. Remarkably, it has resisted corrosion for over 1,600 years despite exposure to the elements. Scientists now believe this is due to a protective layer of iron-hydrogen phosphate formed through the unique combination of high phosphorus content and the forging process. Whatever the case, the result is a silent marvel, a monument to knowledge preserved not in words but in enduring material. Temples and monuments reflected similar mastery. Indian architecture was deeply symbolic, with entire structures designed to reflect cosmic geometry. The Brihadiswara temple, built in the 11th century using granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons, was constructed without modern cranes, nails, or mortar. A sloped ramp over a kilometer long may have been used to move the capstone into place, an engineering feat executed with grace and patience. Even wooden structures like those in the Kerala region were assembled using interlocking joinery and wooden pegs, a craft so refined that temples stood for centuries in monsoon climates without rotting or collapse. Invention also blossomed in music, language, and timekeeping. Ancient Indian grammarians such as Panini in the 4th century BCE developed linguistic systems so sophisticated that his rules for Sanskrit grammar bear resemblance to modern formal language theory, a cornerstone of computer programming. In the world of rhythm, Indian musicians mapped time into intricate cycles known as tala, some stretching beyond what the human ear can easily detect. Water clocks, shadow instruments and astronomical observatories aligned to the solstices allowed scholars to calculate calendars and ritual timings with remarkable accuracy. And yet, throughout all these accomplishments, invention remained deeply human, embedded in the rituals of daily life. Farmers used advanced irrigation systems and plow designs to work their fields. Artisans crafted dyes from indigo and turmeric, spinning cotton into textiles that would one day flow across the Silk Road. Astronomers tracked lunar and solar eclipses with careful records carved into palm leaves, and teachers passed knowledge by recitation, creating chains of memory that stretched across generations. As we step softly out of this realm of gold-tipped instruments and sacred equations, we prepare to enter another world of quiet brilliance. One tucked between mountains and jungles where jade was carved with string and the stars ruled the order of cities. Next, we drift toward the Americas to explore the inventions of the Maya, where time, math, and the cosmos were held in perfect humming balance. Beneath a canopy of emerald leaves, a hidden city emerges from the jungle mist. Its stone steps climb toward the sky, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air is thick with the scent of earth and orchids, and somewhere the call of a quetzal echoes through the trees. This is the world of the ancient Maya, a civilization that grew not from vast empires of conquest, but from networks of cities bound together by trade, ceremony, and an extraordinary understanding of time. For the Maya, time was not a simple line. It was a living cycle, spiraling like the path of a planet across the sky. To track it, they created some of the most sophisticated calendars the ancient world had ever known. Their long count calendar could measure vast epochs, tracking time in cycles of 394 years called baktuns. But they didn't stop there. They also maintained the 260-day tzolkin, a sacred calendar based on ritual days, and the 365-day hab, a solar calendar marking agricultural seasons. These systems overlapped like interlocking gears, creating a kind of chronological machinery that allowed the Maya to record history, plan ceremonies, and align their lives with the heavens. The precision of Maya astronomy remains a quiet marvel. With no telescopes, only naked eyes and stone observatories, they tracked the movement of Venus, the Sun, the Moon, and the planets with accuracy rivaling modern instruments. They knew the exact timing of solar eclipses, the synodic cycle of Venus, and the solstices, all critical not only for agriculture but for spiritual alignment. Cities like Copan Tikal and Chichen Itza were built with architectural elements aligned to celestial events. In El Castillo, the famous pyramid of Chichen Itza, sunlight at the equinoxes casts the illusion of a serpent slithering down the steps, a carefully planned fusion of stone, shadow, and star. To represent time and events, the Maya developed one of the most advanced writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas. Their script, composed of over 800 intricate glyphs, was both logographic and syllabic, allowing for detailed expression of dates, names, histories, and ideas. These glyphs were carved into stone stele, painted on ceramics, and preserved in bark paper codices, 4 of which survive today. Through these writings, we know the names of kings and queens, the dates of their births, marriages, and deaths, and the rituals that filled their courts with incense and music. Numbers, too, were beautifully designed. The Maya used a vigesimal base 20 system with a symbol for 0, a shell that appeared in inscriptions centuries before 0 was formally understood in the Old World. Their positional number system allowed for complex calculations, calendrical alignments, and astronomical predictions. With dots and bars, they recorded quantities, calculations, and durations with graceful efficiency. The inclusion of 0, in particular, marked a major intellectual leap, one that allowed their calendar and mathematics to stretch far into the past and future. Urban planning in Maya cities reflected both invention and spiritual purpose. Great plazas were flanked by pyramids, ball courts, and palaces, arranged to reflect celestial movements and sacred geometry. Reservoirs and canals were dug to manage water in both flood and drought, with some systems capable of purifying water using sand and limestone filtration. This understanding of hydrology supported dense urban populations, even in regions with challenging terrain and climate. Maya architects, working without metal tools or draft animals, cut limestone with astonishing precision. They used tools made from obsidian and jade, and carried massive blocks using human labor alone. Corbelled arches and vaulted ceilings gave rise to temple complexes that still rise above the treetops today. Buildings were often painted in vibrant reds, yellows, and blues, colors derived from natural pigments, some of which remain visible after 1,000 years of weather and time. Craftsmanship extended into daily life. Artisans carved elaborate jewelry from jade and shells, spun cotton into delicate textiles, and molded ceramics into both practical and ceremonial forms. They created musical instruments, flutes, drums, and trumpets that filled temples and plazas with sound. Ball courts hosted the sacred pok-to-pok game, a ritualized sport linked to mythology and sacrifice, played with a rubber ball and immense stone rings. The rules remain partially mysterious, but the scale and symbolism of the game reflect a society that wove invention and ritual together seamlessly. Trade networks brought obsidian from the highlands, cacao from the jungles, and salt from the coast into vast markets, where goods, ideas, and technologies flowed freely. Cacao beans were even used as currency, their value tied not just to flavor, but to sacred tradition. In painted murals and carved stele, we see scenes of marketplaces, rituals, processions, the gentle machinery of daily life, animated by intelligence and meaning. And all the while, the stars moved above them, guiding farmers and kings alike. To invent for the Maya was to remember, to listen to the patterns of nature and respond with harmony, skill, and beauty. Their tools were simple, but their understanding was vast. Their temples, calendars, and glyphs remain not as ruins of a lost people, but as echoes of a deeply attuned civilization. As the night deepens and the stone serpent at Chichen Itzá settles back into shadow, we drift onward toward the Andean highlands, where stone terraces cling to the mountainside and knotted cords whisper the language of numbers. In our next chapter, we ascend into the world of the Inca, where invention rose not in great machines, but in the quiet mastery of earth, fiber, and altitude. The wind moves softly through the high grasses of the Altiplano. Far below, the valleys lie in long, shadowed folds, while peaks rise above the clouds like sleeping giants. Here in the towering heart of the Andes, the Inca built not with mortar and written words, but with coordination, memory, and subtle design. Their empire, the largest in pre-Columbian America, stretched across mountains, forests, and deserts, a feat of both endurance and ingenuity. To sustain such a world, they developed inventions tuned to the altitude, the climate, and the curve of the earth. One of the most quietly remarkable innovations of the Inca was the quipu, a system of recording and communication made from colored, knotted cords. At first glance, a quipu may appear simple, strands of dyed cotton or camelid fiber, knotted at intervals, hanging from a central cord. But within these knots lay information, sometimes numerical, sometimes narrative, carried through the position, type, and spacing of the knots. Each string could represent units, tens, hundreds, or more. Different colors indicated different categories: corn, wool, labor, or tribute. Quipu were used by state administrators, known as Quipu Kameoks, to manage everything from census data and food storage to military logistics and agricultural planning. Even without a traditional written language, the Inca were able to maintain complex administrative control over an empire of more than 10 million people. These records, transmitted by memory and repetition, formed an oral braided history that may have included stories, dates, and laws now lost to time, though scholars continue to search for the deeper grammar encoded in the knots. Beneath the sky, the Inca shaped the land with the same care. Along the mountain slopes, they carved agricultural terraces, or andinas, like stairs wrapping around the hillsides. These terraces were more than farming platforms. They were climate-controlled growing zones, designed to capture water, reduce erosion, and support crops at varying altitudes. Some terraces had layers of gravel, sand, and soil for drainage and insulation. Others created microclimates, where potatoes might grow at one level while maize ripened below. In places like Moray, circular terraces descend in perfect rings, with each step forming a slightly different environment, perhaps used for experimentation or sacred agriculture. Water, too, was gently guided by Inca hands. In cities like Tipon and Ollantaytambo, stone-cut channels, fountains, and aqueducts carried fresh water across steep terrain, flowing through ceremonial courtyards and into irrigated fields. These hydraulic systems required no pumps, only gravity and careful design. Engineers cut stones so precisely that water would cascade with uniform grace, maintaining pressure and cleanliness across miles of channels. Some of these systems still function today, carrying spring water as they did centuries ago. Their architecture mirrored this harmony. Inca builders worked without mortar, carving and shaping massive stones to fit together with such precision that not even a blade of grass could pass between them. At Sacsayhuaman, great zigzagging walls rise like waves of stone, each block uniquely shaped, weighing up to 100 tons, yet fitting together in seamless union. These dry stone techniques allowed the structures to flex during earthquakes, absorbing shocks that would topple modern cement buildings. Suspension bridges, woven entirely from grass fiber, spanned gorges and rivers, connecting remote valleys with swinging arcs of tensile strength. The Quiqueshwashaka Bridge, still rebuilt annually in a community ceremony, reveals a technology that combined engineering and culture. Braided from issue grass and anchored to stone, these bridges could stretch up to 150 feet, supporting the weight of people, llamas, and goods moving swiftly across the empire's roadways. And those roadways formed one of the greatest achievements of Inca engineering, the Quapacyan, or Royal Road System. Over 25,000 miles of stone-paved routes threaded through mountains, deserts, and jungles, connecting all corners of the empire. Lacking wheeled vehicles, the roads were designed for foot traffic and camelid caravans. Rest stations, tambos, were placed at regular intervals, offering supplies, shelter, and fresh relay runners. These runners, or chasques, formed a high-speed communication system, carrying messages encoded in Quipu from the coast to the highlands with astonishing speed. Without iron tools or draft animals, the Inca shaped a world of stunning scale and cohesion. They understood altitude not as a barrier, but as a series of zones, each with its own possibilities. In the highlands, they bred hardy potatoes and domesticated alpacas for wool. In the valleys, they grew maize and beans. And in the lowland jungles, they traded for tropical fruits, feathers, and medicinal plants. Their economy functioned without coins or markets, instead relying on reciprocal labor, shared stores of food, and centralized redistribution. The state collected surplus grain and freeze-dried potatoes, chunyo, storing them in high-altitude granaries with excellent ventilation and insulation. These stores could be drawn upon in times of drought or disaster, a quiet form of resilience built into the very landscape. In Invention, the Inca emphasized longevity, sustainability, and ritual. They built to last not just for themselves but for future generations. Ceremonial spaces were often integrated into practical systems, staircases that led not only to altars but to reservoirs, temples aligned not only to the sun but to the needs of planting and harvest. As the golden light of evening slips behind the peaks and the wind brushes through the terraces like a song, we descend from the mountains. Ahead lies the medieval world, a place of castles and cathedrals, windmills and water wheels, where invention flickered through guild halls, cloisters, and quiet village homes. Next, we journey into medieval Europe, where necessity and imagination gave rise to humble tools that quietly shaped the modern world. Dawn breaks across a rolling landscape of fields and forests, where stone villages sit, nestled in the folds of earth. A bell tolls softly in the distance, calling the day into motion. Smoke rises in wisps from thatched roofs, and roosters echo from farm to farm. This is medieval Europe, a world where invention wears humble clothing. It is found in the turning of a wheel, the sharpening of a blade, the smooth fit of a harness. Yet in this quiet age, innovation moved steadily, reshaping daily life from plow to prayer. Perhaps no invention of this era was more quietly transformative than the heavy plow. Unlike earlier tools suited for the soft soils of the Mediterranean, the heavy plow, with its iron blade and vertical moldboard, could cut through the dense, clay-rich soils of northern Europe. It turned earth more deeply, aerating the soil and bringing fresh nutrients to the surface. This allowed lands previously considered unfarmable to yield grain, expanding the reach of agriculture and supporting the growth of towns and trade. Tied closely to this agricultural shift was the padded horse collar, another simple but significant change. Earlier yoke systems pressed against the animal's windpipe, limiting its strength. The padded collar distributed weight across the shoulders, allowing horses to pull with greater force without injury. This increased efficiency in plowing, hauling, and transport. Combined with iron horseshoes, which protected hooves on rough terrain, it made horses the engines of medieval farming and trade. In the villages, water wheels began to hum with a steady turning grace. Attached to mills built beside rivers, these wheels converted the flow of water into mechanical energy, grinding grain into flour far more efficiently than human labor. Some mills were simple and local, others were elaborate, supporting dozens of tenants. The spread of watermill technology supported growing populations, freeing people from hours of manual toil and making bread more widely available, bread that was, for most, the heart of every meal. Windmills, too, emerged first in the dry plains of Persia and later adopted in northern Europe. With large wooden sails mounted high above the ground, these structures captured the breath of the sky and turned it into motion. Windmills ground grain, pumped water, and powered bellows in blacksmith shops. In flat regions without fast rivers, they became essential. The wind was no longer just a passing gust. It was a tool, waiting to be caught and guided. Inside the walls of monasteries, another quiet revolution unfolded in the careful copying of books. Monks hunched over desks in scriptoria, lit by thin daylight or the warm flicker of oil lamps. Using quills and ink made from oak galls, they copied texts letter by letter, preserving the knowledge of antiquity through the most turbulent centuries. Works of Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy survived because of this diligence. But alongside classical texts, new ideas emerged: theological commentaries, chronicles of history, treatises on farming, and guides to the stars. Parchment, made from animal skin, was the preferred medium, scraped smooth and stretched taut on wooden frames. Books were rare and expensive, each one a year's labor or more. They were stored with care, chained to desks or locked in armories of thought. Yet slowly, literacy grew. Cathedrals and universities began to emerge, and with them, a broader culture of learning. By the 12th century, centers like Bologna, Oxford, and Paris pulsed with quiet intellectual energy, attracting students from across the continent. Within these growing communities, the mechanical clock was born. Earlier civilizations had tracked time with sundials and water clocks, but in medieval Europe, the quest for precision took new shape. The earliest mechanical clocks, driven by falling weights and regulated by escapement mechanisms, appeared in the 13th century. These early clocks struck bells to mark the hours, not with hands on a dial, but with sound. Their ticking marked a new kind of time, measured, regulated, and increasingly central to work, worship, and routine. Spectacles, or eyeglasses, first appeared in the late 1200s, their invention attributed to glassworkers in northern Italy. Simple convex lenses were mounted into frames and balanced on the nose, allowing those with fading vision to continue reading and writing. Though primitive, these early spectacles extended the working life of scholars and scribes. In an age where every word was copied by hand, that clarity was more than comfort, it was preservation. Meanwhile, in workshops and guild halls, metalworkers and craftsmen developed tools that advanced everything from navigation to war. The magnetic compass, refined in Europe from Chinese origins, began to guide ships more safely across cloudy seas. Astrolabes helped travelers calculate their position using the stars. Crossbows, windlasses, and improved siege engines changed the shape of military power, though even in war, innovation often emerged from the need for precision and patience rather than force. And while many inventions remained local, the rise of trade, especially with the Islamic world, and later, China, began to reintroduce and circulate ancient knowledge. Paper, arriving through Muslim Spain, gradually replaced parchment. Its lower cost allowed for more widespread copying, especially once movable type would appear in the next century. For now, though, every word was handcrafted, every page a quiet triumph of focus. As we step out of the castle shadow and hear the hush of wind through thatched fields, we turn toward another region, one where knowledge flowered in tandem with invention, where astronomy, medicine, and mechanical art found sanctuary. In our next section, we journey into the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars and inventors in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo brought ancient learning into new light and cast shadows that shaped the world to come. The air is warm in the courtyard of a library. Sunlight filters through lattice windows, casting geometric shadows onto the polished tiles. A call to prayer floats gently across the rooftops, and the rustle of pages stirs the stillness. This is Baghdad, sometime in the 9th century, the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, and home to the legendary Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Within its walls, scribes and scholars translate the ancient texts of Greece, India, Persia, and beyond, not simply preserving them, but expanding them. Here, invention begins not with machines, but with ideas. The language of inquiry becomes Arabic, and into it flow the works of Ptolemy, Euclid, Galen, and others, carefully copied, questioned, and enriched. In this fertile ground, algebra takes root. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives us the word algorithm, writes foundational texts that introduce systematic approaches to solving equations. His book Al-Kitab al-Muqtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala lays the groundwork for algebra as a discipline, a name derived from al-Jabr, meaning reunion of broken parts. From this foundation, mathematics blooms. Arabic numerals, adapted and transmitted from earlier Indian systems, make calculations swifter and clearer. Decimal notation, fractions and square roots become more accessible. Geometry evolves beyond theory into practical use, informing architecture, surveying and design. Trigonometry, developed further by scholars like al-Battani, becomes essential in astronomy and navigation. In the study of light, another quiet revolution unfolds. Ibn al-Haytham, known in Latin as Al-Hazan, writes the Book of Optics in the 11th century, a meticulous exploration of vision, reflection and refraction. He disproves the ancient idea that eyes emit rays, showing instead that vision occurs when light enters the eye. He experiments with camera obscura, a darkened box with a pinhole, and lays the foundations for scientific method through controlled observation and replication. His work influences centuries of later thinkers, from medieval European scholars to Renaissance scientists. Medicine, too, becomes a deeply methodical craft. The Persian polymath Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, composes the Canon of Medicine, a 5-volume encyclopedia synthesizing Greek, Indian, and Arab knowledge. He classifies diseases, prescribes treatments, and describes over 700 drugs derived from plants, minerals, and animals. His works are translated into Latin and taught in European universities for centuries. Hospitals in cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo become centers not only of healing but of innovation. They separate patients by illness, employ trained physicians, and keep records of symptoms and outcomes. Surgical tools, made of steel and carefully catalogued, are used with precision. The Andalusian surgeon Al-Zahrawi, or Abul Qasis, designs over 200 instruments, many of which resemble their modern counterparts: forceps, scalpels, ligatures, and even devices for removing bladder stones and treating dislocations. Astronomy rises high above the domes. Observatories in places like Samarkand and Maraghe chart the skies with giant astrolabes and armillary spheres. Al-Tusi, an astronomer and mathematician, develops a planetary model that anticipates aspects of Copernican theory. Celestial tables, such as the Zij al-Sindhind and Toledan tables, track eclipses, planetary movements, and timekeeping. Navigation becomes safer and more precise, as sailors use these calculations alongside improved compasses and maps. Invention is not limited to science. Mechanical engineering blossoms in the hands of inventors like the Ban Musa brothers, who compile the Book of Ingenious Devices, a collection of more than 100 machines. These include water-powered fountains, musical automata, and valves that operate like modern float switches. A few decades later, the brilliant Al-Jazari produces the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, filled with intricate diagrams and explanations. He describes gear systems, combination locks, and automata, including a water-powered elephant clock that combines engineering, artistry, and symbolism. His machines are driven by water, gravity, and imagination, designed to tell time, delight the senses, and reflect the harmony of the universe. Libraries expand not only in size but in vision. In Cordoba, the Umayyad court gathers scholars of all backgrounds, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, in an atmosphere of shared learning. At its height, The city's library holds over 400,000 volumes. Paper, newly arrived from China and refined in Islamic workshops, becomes the preferred medium, allowing for the copying and circulation of texts on an unprecedented scale. Paper mills in Baghdad, Damascus, and Samarkand support a growing class of readers, teachers, and students. Architecture, infused with geometry and light, becomes its own form of invention. Mosques, palaces, and madrasas are designed with mathematical precision. Muqarnas, honeycomb-like vaults, fill domes and ceilings with layered complexity. Water, so precious in desert regions, is channeled into fountains and gardens as both utility and poetry. In cities like Fez and Isfahan, innovation is built not only into machines, but into the very layout of public life, where every element, from street to shadow, is designed with care. And yet, for all their brilliance, these inventions do not shout. They hum, they whisper through scrolls, flow through canals, tick in gears, and reflect in mirrored glass. They represent a civilization that sought balance between reason and beauty, faith and curiosity, form and function. As the lamps are lit and stars rise above the domes and minarets, we leave behind this age of luminous thought. Next, we turn toward the firelit studios and linen presses of Renaissance Europe, where invention began to tilt toward acceleration, and one particular innovation would make all others easier to share: the printed book. The faint scent of ink and warm wax drifts through a narrow Florentine workshop. Outside, church bells ring softly in the morning air, echoing off stone walls. Inside, a press creaks into motion. Wooden letters, inked and arranged by hand, press against thick paper with slow, deliberate force. The page is lifted, dried, and set aside. A mirror of knowledge, made tangible. This is the world of the Renaissance, not yet loud with invention, but quietly awakening, like a book being opened for the first time in centuries. At the heart of this transformation was the printing press, a device that, while mechanical in nature, became one of the most profound inventions in human history. In the 1440s, Johannes Gutenberg refined and combined existing technologies into a system that could reproduce texts rapidly and with remarkable clarity. Movable type, cast in metal, was arranged on a flat bed. Ink made from oil and soot was applied with padded balls. Paper was pressed, sheet by sheet, with a screw-based press modeled after those used for wine and olives. For the first time, books could be made not in dozens, but in hundreds and eventually thousands. The effects were both subtle and seismic. Information no longer had to be passed by memory or copied laboriously by hand. Instead, it could be fixed, multiplied, and distributed across cities, borders, and generations. Religious texts, classical works, mathematical tables, and medical treatises all found new life in print. The Bible, translated into vernacular languages, became accessible to common people. But equally important were almanacs, manuals, and maps, everyday tools that quietly expanded what people could know and do. In the studios of Renaissance artists and thinkers, invention took on another shape, that of observation. Painters like Filippo Brunelleschi and Leon Battista Alberti studied the geometry of vision, laying the foundation for linear perspective. With vanishing points and measured angles, they could now recreate the illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat surface, a gentle, revolutionary way of seeing. Architecture, too, became a fusion of form and math. Domes, arches, and proportions were drawn from Vitruvian ideals and built into churches, palaces, and public squares. And then there was Leonardo da Vinci, a mind as restless as it was serene. In notebooks filled with mirrored handwriting, he sketched anatomical dissections, flying machines, gear systems, water pumps, and military devices. His inventions were often years, if not centuries, ahead of their time. Though few of his machines were built in his lifetime, his sketches reveal a way of thinking that bridged the spiritual and mechanical. He saw the world as a set of interconnected systems, bodies, rivers, engines, and thoughts, all flowing with purpose. Da Vinci's anatomical studies, based on hours spent with cadavers, offered unprecedented insight into muscles, bones, and organs. His drawings were both scientific and artistic, rendered with a precision that honored the beauty of the human form. Alongside him, Andreas Vesalius would publish De Humani Corporis Fabrica in 1543, a detailed anatomical text that corrected long-held errors from ancient sources. This marked a quiet but firm shift from reliance on inherited knowledge to the pursuit of first-hand observation. In the realm of time, the mechanical clock evolved further. Earlier medieval clocks had struck the hour, but now, with the refinement of escapement mechanisms, clocks could mark time more precisely. These were no longer just church tower instruments. They appeared in homes, pocket watches, and public squares, counting the hours with soft, ticking regularity. Time itself began to feel more measurable, more present, a resource to be kept, used, and watched. Exploration, too, was shaped by quiet inventions. Navigational tools such as the astrolabe and quadrant, long used in the Islamic world, found new purpose in the hands of sailors charting unknown seas. Cartographers, using printed maps and new reports from voyages, began to redraw the boundaries of the world. The compass, simple in form, profound in implication, guided ships through fog and storm, across oceans once thought impossible to cross. Paper, now more affordable and widespread thanks to printing, supported not just scholarship, but everyday invention. People could keep ledgers, write letters, sketch diagrams, and preserve recipes, remedies, and observations. The Renaissance saw not only the rise of great names, but the broadening of participation. Inventors, merchants, and artisans, many of them unknown to history, worked with wood, glass, iron, and ink to solve problems, refine tools, and improve daily life. Eyeglasses became more common, especially among scholars and scribes. Their convex lenses were hand-ground, mounted in simple frames, and balanced on the nose. These tools extended not only vision, but learning, allowing the aged and far-sighted to read, write, and invent well into later life. It is a small invention, but a deeply human one. The Renaissance was not a singular moment of transformation, but a tide, slow, rising, and filled with layered movement. Inventions did not always announce themselves. They arrived in the turning of a page, the drawing of a line, the casting of a letter. They whispered, "Here is a better way to see, to measure, to understand." As the sun sets over tiled rooftops and candlelight begins to glow behind leaded glass, we prepare to cross into a new era, one driven not only by faith or philosophy, but by curiosity, combustion, and change. Ahead lies the scientific revolution, where invention would shift once more toward telescopes, thermometers, and theories that stretched the very boundaries of the visible world. In the soft haze of early morning, a layer of soot settles gently on slate rooftops. A whistle sounds faintly in the distance, not a bird, but a machine stirring to life. Brick chimneys exhale slow spirals of smoke into the grey sky, and within red brick factories, gears begin to turn. This is England in the 18th century, a land on the verge of becoming something new. Here, in water wheels and winding frames, in pressure valves and precision lathes, the Industrial Revolution begins, not in an explosion, but in a steady rise of invention that would change not only how things were made, but how time itself was lived. One of the quiet but foundational inventions of this period was the steam engine. Though early ideas had existed for centuries, from Hero of Alexandria's Aeolipile to primitive pumps, it was the work of Thomas Newcomen in the early 1700s that first turned steam into usable mechanical power. His engine, built to pump water from flooded mines, used heated steam to push a piston upward, then allowed it to cool and condense, creating a vacuum that pulled the piston back down. It was slow, inefficient, but it worked. For the first time, energy could be uncoupled from muscle, wind, or falling water. Later, James Watt would refine this design, adding a separate condenser and rotary motion. His improvements made steam engines more efficient, flexible, and powerful. They could now drive not only pumps, but textile machines, flour mills, and even locomotives. Steam became the heartbeat of industry, invisible, pressurized, and deeply transformative. But it was in the textile mills that the most immediate changes were felt. Before machines, cloth was woven by hand, a slow and skilled process that took days or weeks for a single length. In the mid-18th century, that changed with a series of gentle yet profound inventions. The spinning jenny, designed by James Hargreaves, allowed one worker to spin multiple threads at once. Richard Arkwright's water frame used flowing water to spin even finer yarns, and Samuel Crompton's mule combined the two into a machine that produced strong, smooth thread, ideal for weaving. The power loom, developed by Edmund Cartwright, mechanized the weaving process itself. Soon, entire factories could produce cloth in quantities that once took villages. These machines did not roar. They clicked, turned, whispered, but their quiet labor multiplied productivity, lowered costs, and brought mass-produced goods into the hands of everyday people. It also brought workers into long shifts, regular hours, and a new dependence on machines. Iron, too, became central to invention. The smelting process was transformed by using coke, a purified coal, in place of charcoal, allowing for larger furnaces and stronger metals. Cast iron bridges, tools, and steam cylinders emerged with a new strength and precision. In workshops, inventors like Henry Maudslay refined the metal lathe, allowing machines to produce identical, interchangeable parts, a step that laid the groundwork for modern manufacturing. Meanwhile, in the quiet offices of inventors and engineers, standardization took hold. Screws, bolts, and gears began to follow measurable patterns. Gauges were developed. Tools were calibrated. Precision became not a luxury but a necessity. In this growing world of production, a tool had to be not only useful but repeatable. Transportation, too, began to shift. Roads were improved with gravel layers and drainage systems, thanks in part to the work of John Macadam, whose macadamized roads allowed for smoother travel in all weather. Canals were dug by hand, creating long, narrow highways of water that carried coal, cloth, and people. Locks and aqueducts, powered by gravity and gates, moved barges up and down hills with quiet elegance. And then came the locomotive. In 1804, Richard Trevithick's high-pressure steam engine pulled a train along iron rails, slowly and with great effort. 2 decades later, George Stephenson's rocket proved that railways could be not only practical, but fast. Tracks spread across the countryside, and the world began to shrink. Where journeys once took days, they now took hours. The steam whistle became the new rooster, calling workers not from sleep, but from farms to factories. These changes were not without cost. The rise of machines brought soot to the air, and labor to the young. Families left their fields for crowded towns. Hours grew longer, and the pace of life quickened. But alongside hardship came access to affordable cloth, warm homes, printed books, and greater mobility. Invention brought disruption, but also possibility. In quiet corners of this mechanical world, other tools emerged: the sewing machine, the safety lamp, the typewriter, each one a small revolution. Inventors worked in shops and kitchens, refining everyday objects. Even food changed. Canning preserved it longer, and new techniques of preservation spread across cities and ships. At night, factories glowed with gaslight, another invention of this era. Light was no longer tethered to flame and wick alone. Gas, piped through iron tubes, fed lanterns that cast a steady glow on the faces of laborers and machines. Eventually, electric lighting would arrive, but this was the first step, a soft, flickering promise of things to come. And yet, in the midst of metal and smoke, the human need for beauty and meaning persisted. Wallpaper, printed with bright patterns, covered factory walls. Music boxes chimed in parlor rooms. The same hands that turned cranks and levers also painted, sketched, and wrote. Invention had not replaced humanity, it had shifted it into new forms. As the last shift ends, and workers drift home beneath the glow of early street lamps, the rhythm of machines slows. But in its place grows something else, a world more connected, more rapid, more wide-reaching than ever before. In our next section, we step into the age of communication, where the telegraph, telephone, and typewriter began to close the distances between minds, one wire at a time. The morning sky above Leiden is pale and clear. A single shaft of sunlight pierces a window pane, illuminating the wooden floor of a study where glass lenses lie scattered beside notes and ink. A microscope, small and simple by modern standards, sits nearby, waiting. And through that lens, for the first time in history, someone peers into a droplet of water and sees what no one had ever seen before: life hidden in motion. This quiet moment belongs to Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch cloth merchant with a gift for patience and a love for glass. With his hand-ground lenses, he discovered an invisible world, teeming, complex, and utterly new. The invention and refinement of the microscope opened a gateway inward. It allowed people to see the fibers of plants, the structure of insects, and the previously unseen inhabitants of water and blood. It changed medicine, biology, and the imagination. But this tool did not appear in isolation. It emerged alongside another lens, one turned toward the heavens. In 1609, Galileo Galilei pointed a telescope at the night sky and discovered that the moon was not a perfect sphere, but scarred and mountainous. He saw moons orbiting Jupiter, challenging the long-held belief that all celestial bodies circled the Earth. He observed the phases of Venus, the dark spots of the Sun, and a Milky Way made of countless stars. Each observation, drawn and recorded in quiet detail, pulled back the curtain on a universe far more dynamic than tradition had allowed. The telescope itself was a refinement of earlier Dutch designs, simple tubes with glass lenses that bent light to magnify distant objects. Galileo's improvements were practical. He crafted stronger lenses, steadier mounts, and clearer views. But the true invention was not only the tool, it was the idea that knowledge could come from looking, from measuring, from doubting and discovering. The heavens, once read as symbols, became objects of study. Alongside these optical tools, another kind of invention emerged: instruments to measure the forces of nature. The thermometer, as we know it today, evolved from early devices that used air expansion or alcohol to show changes in temperature. Galileo himself experimented with air thermoscopes, glass tubes where rising and falling water indicated warmth or cold. Later, sealed thermometers with numerical scales allowed for consistent, repeatable readings. What had once been felt, heat, chill, humidity, could now be recorded and compared. The barometer, developed by Evangelista Torricelli in the 1640s, offered a way to measure atmospheric pressure. By filling a glass tube with mercury and inverting it into a basin, Torricelli observed that the mercury did not fall completely. He concluded that air had weight, a radical idea at the time. This invisible force pressing on everything could be measured, predicted, and connected to changes in weather. Invention, once the domain of artisans and tinkerers, was becoming a way of understanding nature itself. In England, Robert Boyle used the air pump, a sealed glass chamber with a vacuum inside, to study pressure, volume, and gas. He watched as candles flickered out in vacuum, as animals suffocated without air, and as materials behaved differently in the absence of pressure. These were not idle curiosities. They were experiments, tests designed to isolate variables, observe effects, and describe patterns. Boyle's work helped lay the foundations of chemistry and physics, marking a shift toward the empirical, the measurable, the repeatable, the shared. Invention during this time also meant collaboration. Scientific societies began to form: the Royal Society in England, the Académie des Sciences in France, and others across Europe. These were gatherings of scholars, experimenters, and thinkers who shared findings, debated methods, and slowly shaped a common language of science. They wrote letters, published journals, and built collections of instruments, compasses, prisms, pendulums, and calibrated glassware. One of the most elegant inventions of this era was the pendulum clock, designed by Christian Huygens in 1656. Using the natural rhythm of a swinging pendulum to regulate gears, Huygens created a timepiece accurate to within seconds per day, a vast improvement over older designs. This quiet accuracy would go on to shape everything from navigation to the rhythm of daily life. Isaac Newton, working in relative isolation at his family home during a plague outbreak, watched an apple fall and asked not just why, but how. His theories of motion and gravity, eventually published in Principia Mathematica, offered a framework for understanding the physical universe, from the swing of a pendulum to the orbit of planets. He developed calculus, studied optics, and built his own reflecting telescope, using mirrors instead of lenses to reduce distortion. Though his tools were simple, his methods were transformative. Still, the inventions of the scientific revolution were rarely loud or sudden. They arrived in polished brass and ground glass, in ink and silence. They depended on hours of careful work, lenses ground by hand, notes written by candlelight, observations made with aching necks and tired eyes. What was new was not just the object, but the attitude, a belief that the world could be known not through authority, but through attention. And slowly this approach began to ripple outward. Medicine grew more precise, navigation grew more reliable. Weather, once the whim of gods, began to follow patterns and pressures. The world, still full of mystery, began to feel more understandable, not less wondrous, but more reachable. As dusk settles over observatories and quiet studies, and as ink dries on the edge of another discovery, we prepare to enter a new chapter, one of fire and force, where invention would become industry. Next, we journey into the Industrial Revolution, where machines would multiply power, factories would reshape time, and the rhythm of life itself would begin to change. The air is still on a late afternoon in the mid-19th century. In a small wooden building beside a rail line, A man listens intently to the soft ticking of a machine. His hand moves over a slip of paper, translating dots and dashes into words. Somewhere, many miles away, another hand is tapping out those signals, and in between, stretched over poles and wire, is a silence full of meaning. This is the telegraph, one of the most quietly powerful inventions in human history. With it, the world began to shrink, not in size but in time. The telegraph worked on a simple principle that electrical signals could travel through metal wires, triggered by a switch and interpreted by sound or movement. But the idea itself was ancient. The desire to send a message faster than a horse, to let someone know you were safe, or that the ship had landed, or that war had begun. Samuel Morse, an American inventor and painter, created a language for these signals, dots and dashes, short and long taps, forming what became known as Morse code. It was elegant, economical, and universally legible. Once the infrastructure was in place, lines strung across towns, nations, and eventually oceans, the effects were extraordinary. What had once taken days to deliver by post could now be transmitted in seconds. News traveled faster than ships. Markets moved in near real time. And for the first time in history, a thought could be transmitted by machine, not by paper, not by voice, but by rhythm and electricity. But the telegraph was only the beginning. In the 1870s, a soft-spoken Scottish-born inventor named Alexander Graham Bell developed the telephone, a device that transformed electrical signals not into code, but into sound. The human voice, with all its tones, pauses, and imperfections, could now travel down a copper wire and emerge somewhere else, nearly unchanged. It was a miracle, not of volume but of presence. To speak and be heard, without being seen, it changed the nature of distance. The early telephone was humble in form, a handheld transmitter, a receiver for the ear, and a wooden box on the wall. But it carried something profound. People who could not write could now connect. Families, businesses, and communities began to coordinate across miles. It was invention as intimacy, the ability to share news, joy, or sorrow instantly. Alongside these invisible threads, another quiet transformation was unfolding, the invention of the typewriter. Though early mechanical writing devices had been imagined as far back as the Renaissance, it was in the 19th century that the typewriter became a practical tool. The QWERTY keyboard layout, still used today, was designed not for speed, but to prevent mechanical arms from jamming by spacing commonly used letters apart. With each gentle press, a lever lifted and struck an inked ribbon, leaving a perfect letter on the page. For the first time, documents could be produced with consistent clarity, line after line. In offices and homes, the typewriter became a companion to the mind, a bridge between thought and permanence. It made writing more accessible, more professional, and more efficient. For many, especially women entering the workforce as secretaries and typists, the typewriter offered new independence. It was not just a machine, it was an opportunity, a quiet opening in a world still bound by rigid roles. Invention, in this case, changed not just tools but the structure of daily life. At the same time, invention turned its gaze to light. In the early 1800s, a French inventor named Joseph Nicéphore Niepce captured the world's first known photograph, a faint, grainy image of rooftops, taken over several hours on a polished plate coated in bitumen. His collaborator, Louis Daguerre, refined the process, developing the daguerreotype, a method of capturing incredibly detailed images on silver-coated copper. Soon others followed, William Henry Fox Talbot with his calotype paper negatives, and later George Eastman's roll film that made cameras portable and photography widely accessible. Photography offered something entirely new, a way to pause time. Unlike painting or drawing, which required the interpretation of the hand, photography captured the moment as it was. A child's expression, a storm rolling across the plains, a soldier before battle. These images didn't speak, they whispered softly, holding moments that might otherwise vanish. As photographs began to appear in albums, newspapers, and family mantles, they changed the way people remembered and shared. You could see the face of a loved one long gone. You could record history not as a story told, but as a scene preserved. The camera, much like the telegraph and typewriter, became a vessel for memory. Invention during this age of communication was not about spectacle. It was about connection, subtle, transformative, and deeply human. It shortened distances not by speed alone, but by bringing people closer in thought, in feeling, in presence. With every tick of Morse code, every ring of the telephone, every letter on the page, and every image caught in silver light, the world became more knowable, not in its entirety, but in the small personal ways that matter most. As the century turned and electricity began to hum through cities, a new chapter waited quietly ahead. The age of invention would soon give rise to an age of innovation, of currents, circuits, and quiet minds illuminated by glowing filaments. In the next section, we step into the world of early electricity, where light bulbs, radios, and alternating currents would gently transform the shape of modern life. The room is dim, but not dark. A single glass bulb hangs from the ceiling, glowing softly, not flickering like a candle, not hissing like gaslight, but steady. The shadows it casts are gentle, clean. Outside, the street lamps glow too, one by one, their filaments catching fire without flame. This is the quiet magic of electricity, invisible, dependable, and all around. It arrives not with a bang, but with a hum. In the late 19th century, electricity moved from the laboratory into the home, transformed from a curious phenomenon into a practical force. Long before the light bulb became a household item, people had known about static electricity, lightning, and sparks from friction. But it was only through careful experimentation and countless failures that this energy was captured and tamed. Thomas Edison, often remembered for his incandescent light bulb, was not the only inventor in this story, but he was among the most persistent. His design, completed in the 1870s, used a carbon filament enclosed in a vacuum-sealed glass bulb. The result was a soft, long-lasting glow. Others had built similar devices, but Edison's key contribution was practicality, a system that included generation, distribution, sockets, and switches. It was not just a bulb, it was a network. In 1882, Edison opened the world's first commercial power station in New York City. It served only a few blocks, powering street lamps and a handful of buildings. But it marked the beginning of a shift that would unfold gently over the next century. Electricity no longer needed to be understood by the average person, it simply needed to work. And yet, behind that simplicity was a silent debate. Edison's system used direct current DC, in which electricity flows in one direction. It was reliable, but limited in range. Meanwhile, a quieter figure, Nikola Tesla, championed alternating current AC, which changes direction many times per second and can travel over longer distances with less energy loss. Working with industrialist George Westinghouse, Tesla developed AC motors and transformers that would eventually power entire cities. The rivalry between AC and DC was sometimes theatrical, but in the end, alternating current became the standard for large-scale distribution. Thanks to Tesla's designs, electricity could travel across mountains, rivers, and into the countryside. His inventions were not always appreciated in his lifetime, but they laid the groundwork for our modern electrical world. As homes lit up, another wonder followed: the radio. At first, radio waves were not intended for music or conversation. They were used for wireless telegraphy, dots and dashes sent through the air rather than along wires. Guglielmo Marconi, an Italian inventor, built upon earlier theories from scientists like Heinrich Hertz and James Clerk Maxwell to transmit signals across increasing distances. By the early 1900s, he had sent wireless messages across the Atlantic Ocean. Soon after, sound followed signal. In 1906, Reginald Fessenden made one of the earliest radio broadcasts, a voice, a violin, and a reading of scripture on Christmas Eve. Ships at sea, expecting the usual Morse code, instead heard music drifting through their headphones. It was a quiet moment of awe, the realization that sound, once rooted in space, could now travel across it. Radio receivers, boxes with dials and glowing tubes, entered homes in the 1920s. Families gathered around them in the evenings, listening to news, weather, plays, and songs. For the first time, a single voice could speak to millions, not through paper or print, but through air. It was invisible and intimate, a gentle thread tying people together in real time. Electricity also transformed work. Factories, once lit by skylights and gas lamps, could now run longer hours with consistent illumination. Machines powered by steam gave way to motors powered by current. Offices filled with electric fans, heaters, and elevators. Typewriters and telegraphs evolved into electric models. Even domestic life changed. Electric irons, sewing machines, and early refrigerators entered kitchens, softening the weight of daily labor. And yet, amid all this change, the pace remained surprisingly calm. The spread of electricity was uneven, faster in cities, slower in rural areas. Adoption was gradual, building trust over time. People adjusted to switches and plugs, to bulbs that didn't burn out overnight. Children read under steady lights. Radios whispered stories as families drifted into sleep. Even sound itself was transformed. The phonograph, originally developed by Edison, captured voices and music on wax cylinders and later on flat discs. These could be played back, preserved and shared, a favorite melody, a moment in time, replayed at will. The soft crackle of a needle on vinyl became the backdrop to countless memories. Electricity was not loud, but it was steady. It moved through copper and glass, humming beneath floorboards and along poles, disappearing into machines that warmed, turned, illuminated, and connected. It was an invention that did not stand alone. It enabled others. It was the quiet infrastructure of a modern world. As evening deepens and electric lamps cast long shadows across the floor, we prepare to enter a new chapter, one marked not by light or sound alone, but by movement. Ahead lies the age of transportation, bicycles, automobiles, and the dream of flight. In our next section, we rise from the earth on wheels and wings, tracing the inventions that allowed humans to travel farther and faster than ever before. The soft crunch of gravel under rubber, a rhythmic chuff of pistons, and the steady turn of metal wheels on rails, these are the sounds of motion as the 19th century unfolds. Not the roar of rockets or the speed of jets, but the beginning of a different rhythm, steady, mechanical, and full of promise. In this chapter of invention, we trace the gentle rise of transportation, how humans, long bound by foot and hoof, began to roll, ride, and eventually fly. It begins simply with the bicycle. In the early 1800s, a German inventor named Carl Drey built what he called a running machine, a wooden frame with two wheels powered by the rider's feet against the ground. It was called the dandy horse, and while it had no pedals, it was a gentle prelude to something more. Over the next decades, inventors across Europe added cranks, pedals, chains, and inflatable rubber tires. By the 1880s, the safety bicycle, with its equal-sized wheels and rear-wheel drive, became a practical and popular means of travel. The bicycle was quiet, efficient, and accessible. It extended a person's reach beyond their village or neighborhood without the cost of a horse or carriage. For women especially, it brought newfound independence and mobility. With it came modest revolutions in clothing, urban planning, and the rhythm of everyday life. But even as bicycles filled the lanes and lanes turned to roads, a deeper hum was emerging on metal rails. The steam locomotive, perfected in the early 19th century by engineers like George Stephenson, became the heart of the railway system. Stephenson's rocket, one of the first successful models, moved people and goods faster than anything the world had yet seen, a steady pace of 30 miles per hour that felt at the time like flight. Railways spread rapidly. Towns once isolated by days of travel were now connected by a few hours' journey. Trains brought coal to cities, food to markets, letters across borders. Stations became gateways to the wider world. Families gathered to wave goodbye, to greet returning travelers, to marvel at the iron horses that breathed steam and bridged distance. And yet there was something gentle in their movement, not chaotic or random, but scheduled, organized, rhythmic. The timetable became a new form of order, one that shaped both time and space. As tracks stitched continents together, another dream began to stir, the dream of self-propelled road travel. The automobile, at first, was little more than a motorized carriage, noisy, slow, and unreliable. But inventors kept refining. In Germany, Carl Benz built one of the first successful gasoline-powered cars in 1885, using a four-stroke internal combustion engine. A few years later, Bertha Benz, his wife, made the world's first long-distance road trip by car, a quiet but pivotal act of demonstration and determination. In America, Henry Ford took the next step, not by inventing the car, but by changing how it was made. His assembly line, introduced in the early 20th century, allowed automobiles to be built faster and more affordably than ever before. The Model T, simple and sturdy, became the people's car. It transformed not just transportation, but labor, cities, and leisure. Roads were paved, service stations opened, and the landscape itself began to shift around the slow roar of engines. But even as wheels turned on land, human eyes kept lifting skyward. For centuries, flight had lived in myth and metaphor, the wings of Icarus, the sketches of Da Vinci. Balloons had lifted people gently into the air since the Montgolfier brothers' experiments in the 18th century, drifting on wind but not steering through it. What remained elusive was powered, controlled flight. In the quiet dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in 1903, two brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, built something delicate, a glider fitted with a small engine, lightweight materials, and a system of control that mimicked the movement of birds. Their first flight lasted only 12 seconds and traveled just 120 feet. But it was enough. The world had changed. Early airplanes were fragile and slow, but they opened a new dimension. Within decades, they would cross oceans and continents. Mail began to travel by air. Observation from above became possible, and flight, once fantasy, became, quietly, reality. These inventions were not instantaneous. They came through patience, failure, refinement. Each one was built on hundreds of small ideas: rubber that flexed, steel that held, oil that lubricated, gears that meshed. The bicycle depended on ball bearings, the car on combustion timing, the airplane on lift and drag. Each small part, quietly invented, made the whole possible. And the experience of travel changed too. Where once a journey was an ordeal, now it could be planned. Luggage became lighter, maps more detailed, hotels more widespread. People could live farther from their work, visit relatives in distant towns, see landscapes they had only imagined. Movement became memory. As evening settles over a countryside dotted with train tracks, winding roads, and the distant shimmer of a plane's blinking lights, we prepare to take another step. For even as the body could now move swiftly, the mind was about to move faster still. In our next section, we enter the age of digital invention, of circuits, code, and the quiet birth of the computer. A soft hum fills the air. In a room lined with dials, switches, and glowing vacuum tubes, a machine begins to process its first commands. No moving parts, no gears or wheels, just silence punctuated by the flicker of lights and the rustle of paper tape. This is not a factory or a laboratory in the traditional sense. It is a new kind of space, one where thought itself becomes mechanical. The early computer has arrived. Not in triumph, but in quiet calculation. Long before the word computer described a machine, it referred to a person. In the 18th and 19th centuries, human computers were individuals, often women, who performed mathematical calculations for astronomy, navigation, and finance. They worked in silence, with pencils, tables, and rules. Their accuracy was admired, their speed respected, but as calculations grew more complex, the tools to assist them had to evolve. The idea of mechanical calculation is older than we often remember. In the 1640s, French philosopher Blaise Pascal built a device called the Pascaline, a box of turning gears that could add and subtract. Later, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz designed a stepped reckoner that could multiply and divide. These were marvels of precision engineering, but limited in scope. In the 19th century, the English mathematician Charles Babbage imagined something far more ambitious. His analytical engine, though never fully built in his lifetime, was a design for a general-purpose calculating machine, complete with a memory unit, a processor, and the ability to follow instructions on punched cards. It would be programmed, he envisioned, to perform any calculation. His collaborator, Ada Lovelace, understood the full implications of his design. In her notes, she suggested that the machine could one day compose music or manipulate symbols beyond numbers. For this, she is often called the world's first computer programmer. Though Babbage's machine remained unrealized, his vision lingered, a ghost in the gears. In the early 20th century, punched card systems created by Herman Hollerith were used to process the US Census. These machines read data encoded in holes punched into stiff paper cards, speeding up tabulation and laying the groundwork for modern data processing. Hollerith's company would later become part of IBM, a name that would echo throughout the century. But it was during the upheaval of World War II that computing leapt from theory into practice. In Britain, a mathematician named Alan Turing proposed a theoretical device, the universal machine, capable of solving any problem that could be described in algorithmic steps. His ideas, published in the 1930s, became the foundation of computer science. During the war, Turing worked at Bletchley Park, helping to build the Bomber, a machine designed to break the German Enigma code. It was not a computer in the modern sense, but it used electromechanical logic to decipher messages, and it saved lives in silence. In the United States, engineers at the University of Pennsylvania created the ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. Completed in 1945, it filled a large room and used over 17,000 vacuum tubes to perform thousands of operations per second. It was fast, powerful, and incredibly hot. Programmers, many of them women, manually configured its switches and cables to perform each new task. There was no screen, no keyboard, only lights, wires, and paper. Shortly after, computers began to shrink and evolve. The invention of the transistor in 1947 replaced bulky vacuum tubes with small, reliable components that consumed less power and generated less heat. This change was quiet, almost invisible, a shift in material that would have vast consequences. Transistors made computers smaller, faster, and more affordable. The logic remained the same, but the scale changed. What once required a room could now fit on a table. As the 1950s unfolded, computers were used for science, weather prediction, military planning, and industrial design. Programs were written in languages like Fortran and COBOL. Punch cards fed instructions into machines with names like UNIVAC and IBM 7090. Each machine was expensive, rare, and tended by specialists. Yet the dream of making computers accessible, even personal, was already beginning to stir. In the background, another quiet revolution was taking shape: the development of integrated circuits, which combined multiple transistors onto a single silicon chip. Invented in the late 1950s, these chips allowed for even greater miniaturization. They would become the building blocks of every computer to come. Still, the early computer was not a household object. It lived in laboratories, universities, and government buildings. Its voice was not a screen or speaker, but the gentle thrum of fans and the whisper of punched tape. And yet its presence was growing. Invention during this time was not flashy. It required patience, precision, and abstraction. Engineers labored over logic gates and voltage levels. Programmers thought in bits and loops. Each success was hard-won, each improvement the result of countless quiet hours. And behind it all was a belief that thought could be shaped into instruction, that machines could serve minds, and that knowledge, once limited by paper and time, could flow faster, farther, and freer. As blinking lights fade in the soft hum of early servers, we look ahead to a time when computers will leave the lab entirely, becoming companions in pockets, guides in homes, and bridges between strangers. In our next section, we step into the late 20th century, a world of personal computing, digital networks, and the quiet rise of the internet. In a quiet room, lit only by the blue glow of a small screen, someone scrolls, a fingertip gliding across smooth glass. No keys click, no wires dangle. A photo appears. Then a message. Then a map of a place thousands of miles away. All of it happens in silence. All of it happens instantly. This is the smartphone, perhaps the most intimate invention of the modern age. Not because it is grand, but because it is always near. It travels with us, listens to us, and answers before we even speak. The story of mobile technology began long before smartphones, with telegraphs that sent pulses across wires and radio waves that carried voices through air. In the mid-20th century, engineers began experimenting with mobile radio for communication between moving vehicles. Two-way radios allowed police cars and taxi drivers to stay connected while in motion. These early systems were bulky, static-filled, and limited, but they laid the groundwork for the mobile phone. The first mobile phones appeared in the 1970s and early 1980s. They were large, heavy, and limited to voice calls, often costing thousands of dollars and requiring briefcases or car mounts. But they worked. Conversations could now follow movement, unbound from the cords of landlines. Slowly, networks grew stronger. Towers reached higher. Batteries lasted longer. Phones became smaller. And then in 2007, a new kind of device arrived. Not a phone with extra features, but a computer with a voice. Apple's iPhone blended a phone, a music player, a camera, and a web browser into one smooth rectangle of glass and metal. There were no physical buttons, only a screen that responded to touch. It was not the first smartphone, but it redefined what a phone could be and what we could expect from it. With it came the rise of the app, small, focused pieces of software that could do one thing quickly and well. Maps, games, email, social media, photography, meditation, banking, calendars, the functions of an entire desk now lived in your pocket. Each app was like a tool, but softer. No clatter, no whirring, just a tap, a swipe, a response. Soon the Android operating system followed, bringing smartphones to an even wider audience through a multitude of devices. Competition grew. Screens became larger, brighter, and sharper. Cameras rivaled traditional photography. Voice assistants began to speak, softly, politely, asking how they could help. Bluetooth connected phones to cars and headphones. Cloud services allowed files, photos, and messages to flow seamlessly between devices. Mobile technology changed, not just what we did, but how we moved through the world. We no longer memorized directions. Maps turned with us as we walked. We no longer waited for news. It arrived in notifications, gently appearing on lock screens. We captured memories not with film, but with high-resolution sensors, edited with a swipe, and shared with the world in seconds. Even the structure of language evolved. Punctuation softened, messages grew shorter, more frequent, more conversational. Emojis appeared, not childish decorations, but visual punctuation for a new kind of sentence. One part text, one part tone, one part image. A thumbs up, a red heart, a quiet face with closed eyes. All of it said something more than words alone. In the background, wireless networks, 3G, 4G, and eventually 5G, grew stronger and faster. Data moved invisibly, securely, over distances once thought impossible. Wi-Fi blanketed cities. Homes filled with smart devices, lights, thermostats, speakers, even doorbells that sent video to phones from across the world. And the phone itself evolved again, into the smartwatch, the tablet, the wearable. Devices shrank, curved, adapted. You could now monitor your heartbeat while walking, track your sleep, count your steps. With quiet sensors and gentle taps, the body became measurable, not obsessively, but softly, with the promise of care and awareness. Mobile technology also reshaped access. In regions without widespread broadband or computers, smartphones brought the internet directly to people's hands. Banking, education, weather forecasts, emergency alerts, and job opportunities reached places they had never reached before. The device was small, but its impact was vast. Invention in this era was less about grand unveiling and more about seamless integration. The best tools were those that disappeared into life, that worked quietly, reliably, in the background. A gentle reminder, a photo at the perfect moment, a call from someone far away, answered with a smile. And through all of this, privacy, connection, and well-being became part of the quiet conversation. We began to ask, how much is too much? How often should we look? Can we unplug? Or must we always be reachable? These two are questions of invention, not of what we build, but of how we live with what we've built. As night falls and a phone dims beside a bed, its light fading to black, we pause, the device rests. The world grows still, but another chapter waits, one where intelligence becomes not just stored, but shared. In our next section, we step into the present moment, the age of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the quiet rise of machines that learn, predict, and speak. The soft click of a keyboard, the quiet whir of a cooling fan, the glow of a screen flickering to life, these are the sounds of the late 20th century's most defining invention, the personal computer. It does not hiss like steam, or grind like gears. Its voice is gentle, its presence subtle, but with it, a person can write a letter, calculate a budget, draw a house, compose a song, and later connect with someone on the other side of the world. The computer becomes not only a tool, but a space, a place where thought, creation, and communication blend together in new and endlessly adaptable ways. In the 1970s, computing began to change shape, from the towering humming machines of government labs to smaller, sleeker forms designed for individual use. The development of the microprocessor, a full computer processor etched onto a single chip, was the catalyst. Introduced in 1971 by Intel, the microprocessor allowed computers to be dramatically reduced in size while increasing in speed and complexity. This quiet compression of power made the age of personal computing possible. Early machines like the Altair 8800, sold as kits to hobbyists in 1975, had no screen or keyboard, only switches and blinking lights. But they sparked the imagination of a generation. One of those inspired minds was a young Bill Gates, who along with Paul Allen would go on to create Microsoft and design software for a new kind of computer. At nearly the same time, a group of engineers and dreamers in a California garage began working on a different vision, a user-friendly, fully assembled machine. In 1976, the Apple I was born, followed by the Apple II, one of the first successful mass-market personal computers. With its plastic case, built-in keyboard and color graphics, it brought computing out of the realm of scientists and into schools, homes, and small businesses. The 1980s saw a gentle flood of machines: the IBM PC, the Commodore 64, the Macintosh. Each had its own shape, language, and ecosystem. Floppy disks and cassette tapes stored programs. Green or amber screens displayed text and simple graphics. The mouse, a small plastic shell with a ball inside, began to appear, giving users a new way to navigate. Menus replaced command lines. Icons stood in for instructions. For many, this was the first time a machine responded not to switches and levers, but to intuition. And then another invention began to quietly change everything: the network. Computers had always been good at calculation, but in the 1960s and 70s, researchers began connecting them together. ARPANET, a US government-funded project, allowed distant machines to share information via digital packets. It was slow, text-based, and experimental, but it worked. Messages traveled across universities, files were copied between distant servers, and in 1989, a British scientist named Tim Berners-Lee proposed something new, a way to organize, access, and navigate this growing web of information using hyperlinks, browsers, and addresses. The World Wide Web was born. In the early 1990s, the internet, once the domain of scientists and academics, began to spill gently into public life. Early websites were simple: text, links, perhaps a grainy image. Dial-up modems chirped and buzzed as they connected, compressing digital signals through telephone lines. Surfing the web was slow but thrilling. For the first time, an ordinary person could explore information, news, forums and images from across the world without leaving their home. Email replaced letters. Search engines replaced directories. Forums, chat rooms, and early blogs appeared, spaces for voices that had never before been heard so widely. A quiet democratization of knowledge had begun. Meanwhile, the devices themselves continued to shrink and evolve. Laptops replaced desktops. Interfaces became graphical, colorful, more intuitive. Fonts grew friendlier, icons more expressive. Touchpads replaced mice, screens became thinner, and batteries more reliable. By the early 2000s, personal computing was no longer a novelty, it was an expectation. And still, invention continued, not loudly, but through the layering of quiet refinements. The computer became a canvas, a notepad, a library, a studio. It hosted stories, spreadsheets, simulations and songs. It could connect, create, calculate, and communicate, often at the same time. In homes, children learned to type before they could write in cursive. In offices, digital calendars and word processors replaced paper. In libraries, card catalogs gave way to online databases. The computer had become a mirror of the mind, responsive, adaptable, and deeply personal. But even as we settled into this new digital world, another shift was already underway. Computers were no longer just on desks, they were moving into pockets, onto wrists, into cars and cameras. The internet was becoming wireless, and the boundary between the real and the virtual was beginning to blur. As the soft glow of a laptop screen fades into sleep mode and the quiet pulse of a home Wi-Fi router continues in silence, we prepare for the next chapter. The rise of mobile technology, smart devices, and a world connected not just by wires but by air. In the soft light of a kitchen at dawn, someone speaks aloud. "What's the weather today?" A calm voice answers, clear and human-like, but not human. It draws the forecast from data across the web, calculates temperature, wind, and humidity, and replies in less than a second. No wires, no typing, just a question and an answer. This is artificial intelligence as most people now know it, not science fiction, not spectacle, but subtle assistance. Invention that listens. The dream of creating artificial minds is far older than the technology that made it possible. Ancient myths told of statues that moved and spoke, of machines with will and wisdom. But it wasn't until the mid-20th century that these ideas began to take form, not in bronze or gears, but in mathematics and code. In 1950, the British mathematician and wartime codebreaker Alan Turing published a paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In it, he proposed a question that remains foundational: can machines think? His famous thought experiment, now known as the Turing test, imagined a scenario where a person communicates with both a machine and a human through typed messages. If the person cannot reliably distinguish between them, then the machine could be said to exhibit intelligent behavior. This idea didn't propose consciousness or emotions, only behavior that mimics intelligence. And that, quietly, became the guiding principle of artificial intelligence for decades to come. Machines that appear to understand. In the 1950s and 60s, early AI programs focused on specific tasks. These expert systems could play chess, solve logic puzzles, or diagnose simple medical conditions, but only in controlled environments. They were rule-based, limited, and brittle. If something fell outside their programmed knowledge, they failed completely. Then came the idea of learning, of machines that could improve with experience. In the 1980s and 90s, researchers began to build neural networks, inspired loosely by the human brain. These systems weren't programmed with answers, but trained with examples. Show them thousands of handwritten numbers, and they could begin to recognize digits. Feed them hours of speech, and they could start to distinguish words. This shift was quiet, but profound. Instead of writing logic for every scenario, programmers now created systems that could find patterns, systems that could adapt. Still, progress was slow. The computers of the time lacked the power to train deep networks effectively. But that changed in the 2000s, when faster processors, massive datasets, and cloud storage all converged. Suddenly, neural networks became deeper, faster, and more accurate. Image recognition, speech synthesis, translation, and recommendation systems all improved rapidly. And then came a moment that many had long imagined. In 2016, an AI program called AlphaGo, developed by DeepMind, defeated a world champion at the ancient game of Go, a game so complex, so filled with subtlety and intuition, that many believed machines would never master it. But AlphaGo didn't just win, it made moves no human had ever considered, not random, but creative, not imitation, but strategy. The machine had learned not just to play, but to surprise. From that moment on, AI became part of everyday life, often quietly. When your phone suggests the next word in a message, when your streaming service recommends a movie, when a photo app recognizes faces, or a website translates a paragraph, AI is at work. These are not conscious systems. They don't feel, remember, or dream. But they learn, respond, and predict, faster and more fluently with each passing year. Digital assistants, Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, respond to voice, setting reminders, playing music, answering questions. AI models write headlines, generate art, compose music, and summarize articles. Some help doctors spot tumors in X-rays. Others forecast traffic, optimize delivery routes, or detect fraud in banking. And behind the scenes, new kinds of AI models emerge, large language models, trained not on narrow tasks, but on vast oceans of text. These models don't just respond, they converse, they finish thoughts, explain ideas, generate stories, translate poetry. They are not perfect, not always right, and not truly aware, but they are capable in ways that feel eerily human. Ethical questions accompany these advances, softly at first, and then more urgently. Can machines create art? Should they replace writers or teachers? What happens when they make decisions we don't understand? These are not technical questions, but human ones, shaped not only by what we invent, but by how we live with invention. And yet, at its heart, artificial intelligence remains a mirror. It reflects back our own patterns, our words, our images, our questions. It doesn't know us, not in the way we know ourselves, but it listens, learns, and helps in quiet ways. In some places, AI helps farmers predict rainfall. In others, it translates endangered languages or helps track wildlife. It is not the machine itself that matters, but how it is used, as an extension of care, of curiosity, of clarity. As the screen dims, the assistant says good night, and the room falls silent, we prepare to leave the present and take one last step into the possible. In our next section, we look forward to the future of invention. Not in prediction or prophecy, but in questions. What will we build next? And will it help us feel more human? In a small schoolroom beneath a corrugated roof, a teacher places a tablet in the hands of a child. There's no chalkboard, no stack of books, only a solar panel on the roof and a wireless signal in the air. With a quiet touch, the tablet lights up. A lesson begins. A world opens. This is invention not as spectacle, but as access. And it is happening quietly, in corners of the world where innovation means connection, continuity, and hope. The future of invention is not defined by size or speed alone. It is shaped by intention. 1,000 micro-inventions now unfold around us each day, invisible to most, but life-changing to many. These are the softer solutions. They don't make headlines or echo across time zones, but they work, and they whisper a different kind of story. One of careful change, adapted not only to the future we want, but the one we need. In cities, old shipping containers become vertical gardens. In hospitals, 3D printed prosthetics are fitted in days, not months. In disaster zones, drones drop medical supplies with the precision of a breath. And in the stillness of the ocean, solar-powered buoys listen for the songs of whales, mapping their routes to prevent collisions. Each of these inventions shares a quiet quality. They are designed with empathy. They are not just tools. They are answers. One of the most promising frontiers is materials science, the slow, careful art of discovering better matter. Self-healing concrete, created by embedding bacteria that activate when cracks form, extends the life of buildings and bridges. Graphene, a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal pattern, offers strength greater than steel and conductivity higher than copper. It could one day lead to flexible electronics, more efficient batteries, and lighter vehicles. But such materials arrive not with fireworks, but with lab notes, iterations, and waiting. And in the world of health, invention has turned increasingly inward. Wearables already monitor heart rate and sleep, but new devices may soon track hydration, blood sugar, and mental health indicators, all passively, gently, without the need for pricks or probes. Meanwhile, bioprinting continues to evolve, printing layers of cells into structures that may eventually replace damaged organs. These technologies do not cure mortality, but they soften its weight. They extend time. They reduce suffering. Invention also reshapes how we relate, not just to devices, but to each other. Language translation, once the realm of phrasebooks and guesswork, now happens instantly through apps. A tourist in Tokyo can point a phone at a sign and see it transformed into their own language. A mother in rural Kenya can send a voice message to her daughter studying in Toronto. Distance is still there, but it no longer feels so wide. In education, virtual and augmented reality open up new ways to learn. A child can walk through the ruins of Pompeii or the surface of Mars without leaving their classroom. A medical student can practice a surgery in 3D space before ever touching a real patient. These are not just novel experiences, they are new dimensions of understanding. They allow the abstract to become tangible, the distant to become near. And yet, for all these marvels, the most vital invention of the future may not be a machine at all, but a mindset. One of stewardship, not consumption. One that asks not only can we build this, but should we? One that invites diverse voices to shape design, to lead innovation, to define what progress really means. Sustainability, once treated as a limitation, is now seen as an inspiration. Can we design buildings that breathe with the seasons? Can we grow fabric from fungi? Or packaging from seaweed? Can we create computers that use less energy, or devices that dissolve harmlessly at the end of their life cycle? These are not questions of scarcity, but of creativity, of seeing limitation as the mother of elegant solutions. Some of the world's most transformative inventions may come from people working quietly, outside of spotlights. A farmer breeding more resilient crops from native seeds, a programmer in a refugee camp writing code to map clean water sources, a grandmother teaching a forgotten weaving pattern that holds engineering wisdom in its folds. Their work matters. It is invention too, passed not through patents, but through presence. And then there are the children, the next inheritors of invention. Many of them will grow up with tools we once saw only in dreams. Some may build their first app before they write their first essay. Others may learn to code in their own language, on machines that learn with them. But what they build will depend not only on their tools but on their values. Will we teach them that invention is about power or about compassion? In the future, invention may become less about individual genius and more about collective intelligence. Open source communities already model this. Thousands of contributors refining code, translating tools, solving problems together. A solar panel designed in Berlin may be modified in Nairobi and installed in Nepal, all with instructions shared freely, updates pushed silently, improvement unfolding across time zones without borders. The tools may be digital, but the spirit is timeless: cooperation, iteration, generosity. In a world connected not only by wires, but by shared intention, invention becomes something more than technological. It becomes cultural, social, emotional. It becomes an expression of care. As the sun sets on 1,000 labs, workshops, farms and quiet homes where people tinker, sketch, write and wonder, the next era of invention continues to take shape. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for applause. It just asks, softly, what if? The wind is still in the high north, where snow drifts silently against a concrete wedge embedded in a mountain. Inside, in a carefully climate-controlled vault, lie shelves filled with tiny envelopes. Each holds seeds: rice, wheat, lentils, barley, samples from across the world, preserved against the unknown. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, often called the Doomsday Vault, but its purpose is not doom. It is hope, stored quietly in the form of potential. It is invention at its most elemental, the preservation of life itself. In the coming era, invention is being asked to solve gentler, deeper problems. How do we feed billions without exhausting the land? How do we power our cities without choking the sky? How do we heal not just people, but ecosystems? These are not new questions, but they are now asked with new urgency and answered more and more by tools that tread softly. One of the most profound areas of invention is energy, how we generate it, store it, and share it. Solar panels, once fragile and expensive, have become cheaper and more efficient. Entire villages, once dark after sunset, now glow with light drawn from the sky. Wind turbines turn gracefully across hills and oceans, their blades slicing silently through air. Battery technology too has evolved, storing power not just for hours, but for days, even weeks. And in homes, smart grids balance supply. The wind is still in the high north, where snow drifts silently against a concrete wedge embedded in a mountain. Inside, in a carefully climate-controlled vault, lie shelves filled with tiny envelopes. Each holds seeds: rice, wheat, lentils, barley, samples from across the world, preserved against the unknown. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, often called the Doomsday Vault, but its purpose is not doom. It is hope, stored quietly in the form of potential. It is invention at its most elemental, the preservation of life itself. In the coming era, invention is being asked to solve gentler, deeper problems. How do we feed billions without exhausting the land? How do we power our cities without choking the sky? How do we heal not just people, but ecosystems? These are not new questions, but they are now asked with new urgency and answered more and more by tools that tread softly. One of the most profound areas of invention is energy, how we generate it, store it, and share it. Solar panels, once fragile and expensive, have become cheaper and more efficient. Entire villages, once dark after sunset, now glow with light drawn from the sky. Wind turbines turn gracefully across hills and oceans, their blades slicing silently through air. Battery technology too has evolved, storing power not just for hours, but for days, even weeks. And in homes, smart grids balance supply and demand like an orchestra of electrons, adjusting quietly in real time. Water too has drawn the attention of invention. New desalination systems convert seawater to drinking water with less energy. Filters the size of straws make rivers and streams safer for those without infrastructure. Drip irrigation and moisture sensors help farmers grow more with less. And satellite imaging now guides conservation, showing where water flows, where it pools, and where it disappears. In medicine, the future is small and personal. Wearable devices monitor heart rhythms, oxygen levels, and sleep patterns in real time. Genetic testing offers insights into ancestry, disease risks, and treatment plans tailored to the individual. Artificial organs, hearts, kidneys, even lungs, are being 3D printed from living tissue. And in laboratories around the world, researchers quietly prepare for the next outbreak, learning from the past to develop vaccines faster, test earlier, and share knowledge more freely. Meanwhile, the fabric of cities is changing. Urban spaces are being redesigned for bicycles and pedestrians. Green roofs cool buildings and clean the air. Self-driving vehicles navigate with soft whirs and sensor-guided grace. Some cities explore vertical farms, growing lettuce and herbs in stacked trays under LED lights. Others embed sensors into roads and buildings, creating smart environments that respond to traffic, weather, and energy use without human intervention. These are not cities of metal and noise, they are cities that listen, and above us, the stars remain, no longer out of reach. Reusable rockets rise, land, and rise again, their engines more efficient, their missions more ambitious. Satellites the size of toasters orbit the Earth, capturing data about forests, fisheries, and changing coastlines. Probes glide through the solar system, photographing moons, reading atmospheres, and gently reminding us of our scale. Mars rovers, built with delicate arms and tireless wheels, continue their quiet work, digging, analyzing, transmitting. And telescopes, now launched into space itself, see deeper into time than any eye before them. The edge of the visible universe flickers gently on a screen. The kettle boils. A notification chimes softly on a smartwatch. Outside, an electric vehicle glides down the street, nearly silent. Inside, someone whispers to a speaker, "Play something calm," and without fanfare, music begins. No buttons, no wires, no ceremony. This is not science fiction, it is now. And it is quieter than we imagined. Invention today is no longer something we visit or observe. It is something we live with, folded seamlessly into habits, routines, and spaces. A thermostat that adjusts before we ask. A lamp that dims with the sunset. A door that locks as we leave. These are not grand machines or world-changing breakthroughs. They are small kindnesses, built from code and sensors, designed to remove friction from life. And yet, even the smallest invention carries the echoes of a long journey. The wireless charger beside a bed is powered by principles discovered in the 19th century. The glass screen on a phone has roots in medieval sound processing. The voice assistant's reply rides on decades of speech recognition research and layered neural networks. Every invention carries within it a lineage, quiet, cumulative, and human. One of the defining features of modern invention is personalization. Technology adapts not only to our needs, but to our preferences, our pace, our moods. Streaming services offer music for focus or rest. Reading apps adjust font and color for tired eyes. Calendars remind gently, nudge softly, help quietly. Invention has become a companion, unobtrusive, responsive, and designed to soothe. Even the spaces we live in are shifting. Smart homes, once a futuristic fantasy, are now common. Lights turn off as we exit a room. Security systems send quiet alerts to our phones. Windows tint automatically to manage heat. The home, once passive, becomes active, not loud but aware. These changes bring convenience, but also questions. What does it mean for our spaces to respond to us? To anticipate our needs? Does this bring ease or dependence? As with all invention, the answers lie not in the tools themselves, but in how we choose to use them. In workplaces too, the rhythm of invention hums beneath the surface. Collaborative documents update in real time. Video calls shrink continents. Algorithms organize information behind the scenes, helping us sort, search, schedule. These are not dramatic changes, just 1,000 small efficiencies that together make a difference. In education, children now learn in classrooms shaped by technology. Some use tablets instead of notebooks. Others attend school remotely, their teacher's voice arriving through headphones. Interactive whiteboards display lessons from across the globe. AI tutors respond to questions in real time. These tools are not meant to replace teachers, but to support them, to expand the reach of care. Invention also gently reshapes leisure. People walk with earbuds that offer language lessons, meditations, or quiet narration. Sleep apps provide gentle soundscapes and stories to ease the mind. Virtual reality allows a person to wander through forests, museums, or imagined worlds from a chair. The boundary between learning, rest, and play becomes softer. And yet, amid all this convenience, there is a counter-movement, a desire to unplug, to return to analog simplicity. Journals made of paper, mechanical watches, hand-cranked radios, vinyl records. These are not rejections of invention, but reminders that slowness, texture, and imperfection also have value, that sometimes the best interface is touch. That invention must make space for stillness. We also begin to see invention not just as what we create, but how we relate. A redesigned wheelchair that allows a child to navigate a beach. An app that helps the visually impaired identify colors. A building shaped for sound, so even those with sensory sensitivities can feel at ease. These are inventions of empathy, designed not for spectacle, but for dignity. Around the world, communities are reclaiming the right to shape invention. Indigenous engineers blend traditional knowledge with new materials. Local makerspaces give tools to students, artisans, and elders alike. What emerges is a quieter form of innovation, rooted in place, culture, and shared memory. Even language changes. We no longer speak only of users and consumers. We speak of participants, collaborators, co-creators. Invention is no longer something done for people, but with them. The barrier between creator and audience softens. A teenager designs a game that is played by millions. A farmer develops an irrigation solution that spreads across regions. Innovation becomes community. And at the center of it all remains something unchanged: the human desire to ease suffering, to extend beauty, to understand more than we did before. Whether through a complex algorithm or a hand-carved tool, invention is still, at its heart, a gesture of care. As evening settles and the soft glow of screens fades to black, the rhythm of everyday invention continues, pulsing quietly beneath sidewalks, behind walls, between people. It does not announce itself, it does not ask for applause, but it is there, smoothing the day, illuminating the night, and waiting gently for whatever tomorrow brings. A hand reaches out. In darkness, in cold, in wonder, it grips a tool. Then it draws a symbol on a wall. Then it turns a page. Then it taps a screen. These gestures, though separated by millennia, are part of the same movement, the same quiet impulse, to make something better. Invention has never been a straight line. It loops, it forgets and remembers. It borrows, reinvents, abandons and rediscovers. The same wheel re-emerges in pottery, in carts, in turbines. The same threads of thought bind together sundials and atomic clocks, ox carts and space stations, cave pigments and quantum processors. We may speak of eras: stone, bronze, iron, digital, but beneath them all lies a steady rhythm, people responding to their world with imagination, with need, with care. From the very first chipped hand axe, invention has been both tool and mirror. We built what we needed: to hunt, to cook, to speak, to shelter. But we also built what we could imagine: instruments to measure the sky, sculptures to honor the dead, stories woven into fabric, patterns hidden in music. The impulse to invent is not just survival. It's also expression. It's how we make sense of who we are. And invention is never solitary. Behind every great breakthrough are thousands of quiet hands, the anonymous laborers, the caregivers, the keepers of memory, the mentors, the peers. We remember names like Galileo, Edison, Turing, Curie, but behind them are networks of support and culture, of forgotten languages and lost manuscripts, of those who shaped their ideas long before they held a pen or tool. Invention also echoes between civilizations. Paper from China met movable type in Germany. Algebra from Baghdad found its place in Paris. The compass from the South China Sea guided ships into the Atlantic. Knowledge flows. Ideas migrate. No invention belongs to one place. It belongs to the thread of humanity, long, tangled, and quietly unbroken. And what of the spirit of invention? It has always been twofold, one part practical, one part poetic. A loom may feed a village, but it may also weave a tapestry that carries a prayer. A clock may measure hours, but it may also carve meaning into time. A machine may automate, but it may also reveal, helping us see patterns in nature, in society, in ourselves. Not all inventions are gentle. Some have caused harm. Weapons have grown more powerful, surveillance more subtle, divisions more stark. But even in these shadows, invention carries choice. A tool, after all, is not its use. It is its possibility. A flame can warm or destroy. A system can control or connect. What matters is the hand that guides it, and the heart behind that hand. We've watched invention move from the visible to the invisible, from giant stones and towering aqueducts to silent code and microscopic circuits. The tools of today may weigh nothing, but they carry great weight. Algorithms decide what we see, what we hear, even what we believe. And yet, even now, these tools are still ours. We shape them, and if we listen closely, they can still teach us something in return. For invention is not just outward, it is inward. As we build systems and machines, we also construct stories, identities, values. We invent not only technologies, but selves, languages, rituals, meaning. A lullaby sung to a child is as much an invention as the light bulb. A recipe passed through generations, a garden planted in an empty lot. These too are part of the lineage. Even now, as satellites orbit the Earth, as AI answers questions, as robots learn to walk, we are still reaching for something simple: understanding, safety, beauty, belonging. Invention is how we speak to the future, not with certainty, but with kindness. Not to show what we know, but to say, we were here, we tried, we hoped. And so, as we near the end of this long, quiet journey through time, we prepare for one last reflection. A return not to the past or the future, but to the present moment, where the echo of invention still surrounds us, and the next idea waits gently in the mind of someone reaching for it. Somewhere, the last lamp of the evening is turned off. A home grows quiet. A phone dims to sleep. A satellite passes silently overhead, watching a world full of stories. Stories made not only of events and people, but of tools and thoughts, gestures and questions. This is the stillness after the spark, the hush that follows creation when invention has found its place, and we are left simply with being. Invention does not live only in blueprints or code. It lives in the softened path beneath our feet, worn by centuries of footsteps. It lives in the curve of a bowl, the stitching of a garment, the way a melody repeats just so. It lives in the ease of a task once difficult, the shape of a room built to hold warmth, the glint of a memory held in glass or ink. It lives in the invisible, in what no longer needs to be noticed to be known. The history of invention is not a single line, but a long braided thread, woven from necessity, yes, but also from wonder, from boredom and brilliance, from need, but also from love. It is as much about shelter and survival as it is about celebration. The cup raised, the notes played, the light hung above a gathering place. Invention is how we meet the world, and how we invite the world to meet us in return. And it never ends. Somewhere right now, someone is working late at a desk, sketching a new circuit or scribbling out lines of code. Somewhere else, a child is asking, why does it work that way? Or what if we did it differently? These questions are the quiet beginning of every invention that will ever be. They do not need applause. They need time, care, and listening, because invention is not only an answer, it is a conversation with nature, with each other, with the future, and as we have seen, it is not always loud or fast. It can be slow, steady, patient. It can arrive not with a bang, but with a breath. It can come in the planting of a tree that will not give fruit for years, in the adjustment of a lens, in the way we arrange a kitchen, build a path, design a chair. Invention is not only for the brilliant or the bold, it belongs to anyone who has ever solved a problem, eased a burden, or made something just a little bit better. And so, as we return now to stillness, let us rest in the knowledge that this story continues, not only in laboratories and factories, but in homes and hands, gardens and gatherings. Every quiet improvement, every gesture of thoughtfulness, every effort to make life more meaningful, these too are inventions. The arc of invention does not point only to progress. It points to presence, to the way we care for each other through the things we create. A bed that holds warmth, a roof that catches rain, a song remembered, a story passed down. These are not just inventions, they are invitations to stay, to rest, to be. And now, as this gentle journey draws to a close, we return not to silence, but to a deeper quiet, one filled with the soft echo of every hand that has ever shaped the world for the better. Sleep now, with the memory of stone and starlight, of questions whispered and sparks tended. Sleep with the knowledge that the tools are still in our hands, that the next invention begins, not with noise, but with noticing, and somewhere, tomorrow, it will begin again.